Chapter 388. The explosion on the planet signified the official start of this inevitable battle. The A Squadron had their own arrangements, and the squads had their own responsibilities. The A Squadron's formation had changed, and the B Squadron was not allowed to go to that area as they pleased. If they did, they might ruin the A Squadron's formation and plan, and they might even be mistaken for an enemy and be killed. If that happened, they could only blame it on their own luck if they were accidentally killed. Every B Squadron had their own squad leaders. Although the 3rd B Squadron wanted to protect the 11th Squad, it was incredibly difficult to locate Silin's spaceship in a battlefield full of small space planes and all kinds of space fighters. Moreover, the 3rd B Squadron had just received an order to protect the 11th Squad's starship. Other than the squad leader and a few people, no one in the 3rd B Squadron knew that the 11th Squad's starship had been replaced. They naturally carried out the order without any questions. What they didn't know, however, was that the person they wanted to help had been forced out of that small starship. Silin had spoken to the 3rd B Squadron's squad leader and told him to ignore them and protect the 11th Squad's starship. Since Silin had said so, the 3rd B Squadron's squad leader no longer insisted. The 3rd B Squadron had to pay attention to their own squad's movements, the enemy's movements, and the A Squadron's new orders so that they could respond at the first sign of trouble. They couldn't even take care of themselves right now. The large starships and spacecrafts had already raised their energy shields the moment the alarm went off. The dark red energy shields told the people piloting the spacecrafts that the energy shields were currently activated. Don't collide with them, or you'll be digging your own grave. Isn't that energy shield made from the energy or we discovered before? Hui Mao patted Silin excitedly after he saw the image on the screen. Yes, that's the one. The dark red energy shields on Vanguard starships and spaceplanes were made from the energy or Silin discovered back when he was still in the 6th Division. After that, the mining of the energy ore on that planet was directly handed over to the A Squadron and the 6th Squadron's ranking in the Vanguard fleet soared. However, that was all in the past. The credit belonged to the 6th Division, not the 11th Squad. How infuriating! Hui Mao was now full of resentment. When it thought about how the fruits of its hard work had all gone to others and how little it had gained, it was very angry, very, very angry. The result of Hui Mao's anger was that he had scratched a couple of holes in the metal table beside him, and that was after Cheto had comforted him. Inside the aircraft, Yudi sat in the main command seat and gave commands. A team of robots stayed on the aircraft to assist in piloting, so the others could free up their hands to do other things. Sha Ro and Tico, Yudos and Tang Qiuqiu, Dias and his wife, Shusag and Tesoro, Carrie and Chifeng, and Xiao Shang and Ba Dao were all flying out to meet the navigators. Shusag had always thought that the 11th Squad had some influence even though it was a little small in number. Now, however, Shusag and his son were in the same fighter. As they watched the dense array of spaceships, starships, and fighters surrounding the planet, Shusag finally understood why the A Squadron's members reacted the way they did when they arrived at the 11th Squadron's starship for the handover of command. They didn't care. Yes, the 11th Squad's dozen or so people were practically negligible when compared to the entire Vanguard. Back on the starship, although the 11th Squadron's starship was small, it was still a starship. It was still different from other spaceships. Even if it didn't have much of a presence, it still had a presence. But now, the spaceplane Silin was on right now was hidden in this enormous battlefield. No one would know that it was actually a flying tool used by a squad leader of one of the 4 great squadrons on the main battlefield. Compared to the other 10 squadrons, Silin's current situation could only be described as shabby. Shusag recalled that the people who had followed Stanley to the 11th Squad's starship might have looked at Silin with sympathy and mockery. Fighter jets flashed by, flames from explosions, all kinds of sound waves, electromagnetic interference, energy-absorbing weapons, and cannons bombarded and counterattacked one after another. White cold beam cryogenic cannons and scorching particle cannons intersected in this seemingly chaotic battlefield. Fighter aircrafts were constantly being destroyed, and smaller aircrafts were also being destroyed. Some were from Vanguard's side, and some were from Navigator's side. The surrounding space environment was already filled with debris of various sizes. Aircraft that had been hovering in front of Shusag a moment ago were blown to smithereens in the next. Not even a groan could be heard from them. Life and death were decided in the blink of an eye. Sillin thinks of a phrase he had read in Communidon's diary: a battlefield that burns with one's life. The atmosphere of the battlefield was always able to make the hunters immerse themselves in it. Even the usually timid hunters would ignore the fear in their hearts at this moment and rush into the battlefield that was filled with sparks and sparks. Sillin stood inside the control room of the spaceplane. There were 8 light screens in front of him, and they were displaying the movements in 6 different directions. The remaining 2 screens were displaying the situation on the planet. A normal person would be dazzled if they had to pay attention to 2 or 3 screens at the same time, but Sillin could easily pay attention to 8 screens at the same time. While paying attention to the activity on the light screen, Sillin told Cheto some information that he needed to record and analyze. Wheeze was the only one who was bored enough to walk around the metal platform and scratch its claws twice. Judging from the frequency at which its whiskers were trembling, Sillin knew that the fellow was very impatient and holding back its anger. Sillin frowned as he stared at the screen. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked something. After carefully analyzing the images displayed on the screens, Sillin's attention was focused on the debris floating in space that was growing in number. These debris were affecting the fighter aircrafts quite a bit, and it was obvious that many of the aircrafts at the center of the battlefield had slowed down a bit. Sillin zoomed in on one of the screens. There were some things that looked like floating rocks among the debris of various sizes. What on earth are they? Sillin zoomed in on the details on the other 7 screens. Can you analyze these further? Sillin asked Cheto. Cheto stared at the floating pebbles Sillin was pointing at and tried to analyze them. Unfortunately, he couldn't come into direct contact with them, and there were all kinds of disturbances in the battlefield, so his ability to analyze them was limited. I can't. I'm not sure what they are, but they're different from the debris. I sense some special signals, Cheto replied. The communicator in Sillin's hand flashed a few times while he was thinking. Is it invisible wuxia? It wasn't a video this time. It was a message: beware of bugs. Bugs? Bugs. Sillin immediately connected the communicators on the 6 fighter aircrafts and communicated with them. Be careful not to touch those floating debris. Avoid them as much as you can and don't come into contact with them. Since the outer material of the aircrafts was a little tough, it wasn't a big deal to bump into small debris from time to time. Although they were a little puzzled by Sillin's words, they did as they were told. At worst, they would just slow down a bit. Everyone's speed had decreased quite a bit anyway, so they could take care of themselves as long as they were careful. After all, this wasn't the A Squadron's central battlefield, and the fighter aircrafts at the center of the battlefield were moving around in a hurry. Even if they slowed down, they would still be much faster than the fighter aircrafts at the periphery. This was the difference in technology. Yudos didn't think that he was any weaker than the A Squadron. In fact, he was confident that he could charge into the central battlefield at his original speed, take out a couple of navigators and return safely after that. Originally, Yudos wanted to give it a try, but Sillin had warned them before the battle began, so Yudos gave up on the idea. At worst, he would just try somewhere close to the central battlefield. Sillin's words reached his ears before he could act. What's there to avoid debris? Some of the wreckage was classified as wreckage within the safety line, which was the wreckage and other obstacles that the warship could withstand, according to the warship's functional coefficients and defensive capabilities, etc. Sometimes, avoiding debris on purpose would actually make everyone's hands and feet tied. It didn't take long for everyone to understand why Sillin gave such an order. Carrie accidentally ran into an obstacle while making a sharp turn after avoiding a shot from a navigator. You've hit a debris, Chifeng said. It hadn't even been 2 minutes since Sillin said that, and Carrie had already run into one, so Chifeng reminded him. Got it, little friend. Carrie looked at the display on the fighter's instrument. It was just an obstacle within the safety line, and it didn't seem to affect the fighter's functions. Just as he finished thinking this, he realized that the debris was stuck to the fighter. After trying to shake it off a few times, Carrie decided to ignore it. However, very quickly, the fighter's safety system sounded a warning. What's going on? Carrie was puzzled. Chifeng followed the system's warning and pulled up the image taken by the external camera. What's this? Chifeng was shocked. After Carrie fired and blasted away the enemy fighter, he turned his head to look. Fuck! On the tail of Carrie's fighter, there was something about a meter long stuck there. It looked like the stone debris floating in space, but the problem was that this thing was alive. The originally somewhat bumpy oval thing gradually stretched out, revealing a head and sickle-like claws. The other abdomens were like suction cups sucking tightly on the fuselage, and the liquid that sprayed out of this thing's mouth began to corrode the fuselage. Fortunately, this fighter was made of some special materials, so its resistance was a little stronger. After a long time, only a shallow mark was left on it. At the same time, Carrie discovered that one of the navigator's battleships also had the same thing. The guys over there were not as lucky as Carrie. Their battleship was quickly corroded, and in the space environment, any small hole on a flying tool could be fatal. Although he didn't know what exactly happened on the other side, Carrie only knew that the warship was destroyed by another Vanguard warship not long after it brushed past them unhurriedly. There was no telling if the thing stuck to the fighter plane had been destroyed along with it or not. Carrie quickly contacted Sillin and reported the situation to him. Meanwhile, Sillin was already analyzing the thing. He ordered all 6 fighters to fly to where the spaceplane was. Fortunately, the material used to make the aircrafts were pretty resistant to corrosion, so there was no danger for now. After Sillin had sorted out the information he had on the thing and sent it to the B Squadron commanders, he summoned Cheto and Huimao. Get ready to leave. Huimao's spirits lifted. We can finally leave this place. Sillin brought up the star map of this war zone and drew a circle on it. Then he said to Yudi, circle around this area. Don't stray too far away. Alright, don't worry. Yudi looked at the area Sillin circled. It was where their starship was located, and the 11th Squad starships were flying around this area all this time. More and more fighter aircrafts were gathering in this area. Some were navigators and some were vanguards. Fuck, electrocution is useless against them. Carrie cursed while staring at the image captured by the external camera on the system screen. Right now, 2 of those strange things were stuck to their spaceplane. He hadn't noticed it at first, but now he realized that there were more and more of them around them. When did these things appear? I'll go take care of them, Chifeng said. Don't. We're almost at the place, Sillin said. You should take care of the 3 enemy fighters first. There were 2 weapon systems on a fighter. One was for the pilot, and the other could be used by the co-pilot. Right now, Chifeng was sitting in the co-pilot seat. Although he didn't really pilot a fighter, he was helping Carrie deal with the enemy fighters. Compared to shooting, Chifeng preferred the most primitive way of combat, hand-to-hand combat, no, claw combat. Carrie was worried about leaving Chifeng alone. The little guy wasn't good at space, and it would be terrible if he lost control of his armor and got flung out of the spaceplane. When the fighter finally arrived at the range, Sillin said, Sillin's voice entered Carrie's communicator. Adjust the pilot speed to medium 3rd gear, and don't attack for half a minute. Cheto and I will help you take care of the things on the spaceplane. Carrie did as Sillin said and started the countdown. Their time limit had always been very strict. Half a minute later, Carrie and Chifeng would enter attack mode again. When Carrie's countdown reached the 13th second, a figure flew toward their fighter. The figure's feet were tightly attached to the fuselage, and one of his hands was pressed against the fuselage to stabilize himself in a triangular formation with his feet. After he stabilized himself, the figure swiftly punched the insect that was spraying corrosive liquid on the fuselage. No sound could be heard, but when Carrie saw the thing's head get punched through, he thought it should have been a crisp crack. Because the thing looked very hard on the outside, the person's fist must be really hard to punch through. Although the insect's head was already dead, its legs were still tightly attached to the fuselage, so Carrie could only pull it off directly. Even after the whole thing was pulled off, the suction cups on its legs were still tightly attached to the fuselage. Carrie felt a chill run down his spine when he saw the strange things that were forcibly torn off the fuselage and the broken limbs. What the hell is this? After the first insect was taken care of, the second one was quickly torn off the fuselage in the same way. By the time Carrie's countdown reached the 13th second, Both of them had been taken care of. "Thanks, Cheto," Carrie said to the figure flying into the distance. "Is that Cheto?" Chifeng was puzzled. Who else could it be if not Cheto? That's how Cheto does things. He likes to solve his problems with his bare fists because it's more direct and less troublesome. However, I'm afraid that Cheto is the only one who has such hard fists, Carrie said. Chifeng frowned and scratched his red hair. "I still think that person is Sillin." "Sillin? Doesn't our captain always use swords and guns?" Carrie retorted, but Carrie quickly fell silent. Now that he thought about it, the man's movements were so smooth when he took care of the two strange things. It was so smooth that it didn't look like he was on a spaceship, but a stone bench in a normal environment. It was too natural, too smooth, and he punched a hole through the strange thing's head. No matter how he looked at it, it should be Cheto's doing. Carrie hesitated when he saw Chifeng's determined gaze. "Then who was the person who flew past just now? What are you doing, idiot? You're spacing out at a time like this?" Xiao Shang's angry curses came from Carrie's communicator. Just now, an enemy navigator had locked onto Carrie's aircraft and almost opened fire while Carrie was spacing out. If Xiao Shang hadn't taken care of the enemy first, Carrie's aircraft would have been hit already. "Ahem, I spaced out," Carrie quickly adjusted himself and answered. "Is your brain full of shit? How can you get distracted on a battlefield like this? You joined the squad before me." Xiao Shang mocked. "Thanks, brother." Carrie came back to his senses and stopped thinking about whether the man was Sillin or Cheto. Carrie knew that their captain had never revealed his true combat strength, but he couldn't help but overlook Sillin's strength. It was because Sillin mostly used swords and guns in front of them. On the other side, Sillin helped Carrie and the others get rid of the bugs stuck to their aircraft after he had taken care of the two bugs on it. "How is it, Cheto?" Sillin asked. "We've sent them the sample analysis data already," Cheto said as he tore a bug off Shusag's body. He had sent the bug analysis and sample analysis to Shikai and the others so that they could analyze it for him. Right now, neither he nor Sillin had the time to do so. Hui Mao was crouching outside Yudo's aircraft and chewing the bug he had just bitten off. He spat it out after chewing twice. "This is disgusting." Chapter 389. Although Sillin didn't know what kind of insects they were, he knew that the person who created them must have put a lot of effort into it. After all, there were very few species that could synthesize a corrosive liquid that could melt away the outer materials of a space fighter and survive on their own. This time, it was obvious that someone had done it on purpose. Not only that, they had disguised the insects so that they looked like floating rocks and made it difficult for others to detect them. It could be said that they had put a lot of thought into this. Was it Wuxia's doing? Or was it the Mist's people who had been quiet all this time? It couldn't be the Navigator's people because a lot of Navigator's people had fallen victim to the same thing. The Mist's people were more likely to be the culprit. There wasn't any big news from the A Squad. Even if the higher-ups of the A Squad had been assassinated, it probably wouldn't reach the A Squad's ears yet. Right now, Sillin didn't want to care about that. Right now, his attention was on the 11th Squad starship. Ever since he and Cheto left the spaceplane to help take out the insects, Yudi had told Sillin that more and more fighters were gathering at their starship's area. Almost 10 minutes had passed, and the number of people on the other side had increased. Although the starship was still flying, it was like the eye of a storm right now. Wherever it went, there would be a circle of people surrounding it. Some were vanguards, some were navigators. Moreover, Sillin believed that there were definitely people from Mist mixed in with these spaceplanes and fighters. Both sides were in chaos because of the insects, but they quickly came up with a countermeasure to deal with the situation. One of them was the pilot, and the other was the machine gunner to shoot the insects that had latched onto other spaceplanes or spaceplanes. Everyone was helping each other out. Some people noticed Sillin's actions, but they didn't know who Sillin was because he was wearing a suit of armor. All they needed to know was that he was a member of the Vanguard. Moreover, a lot of people who saw Sillin thought that he was sent by the A Squad to help them. This was a kind of habitual thinking because when it appeared at this time, coupled with Sillin's mobility, it gave people the feeling that he was one of the specially trained elites in the A Squadron. Sillin dealt with the bugs on Carrie's spaceship and watched them adapt quickly. Then, he returned to the spaceship that Yudi was piloting. However, he did not enter the spaceship. Instead, he stood in a depression on the side of the spaceship and watched the battlefield. In addition to causing trouble for both sides, the insects were mainly used to attract attention. Perhaps when everyone was paying attention to the insects, some people had already begun their secret operations. Sillin knew that Vanguard's A Squadron had sent out several special operations teams to attack the main starships of navigators, and navigators were clearly prepared. Both sides were in a stalemate. Every second, there was a pincer attack. Every second, there were new warships or spaceships appearing from hyperspace. Both sides wanted to catch each other off guard, but it was obvious that both sides had a deep understanding of each other, so there was not much effect. These are only superficial. In this space battlefield that cannot be seen, who knows how many secret battles are taking place? For example, the high-level officials on the planet who went to negotiate, and the things that were going on inside the 11th Squadron starship. Yudos piloted the spaceship and quickly took out an enemy that was chasing after the spaceship. He did not need Tang Qiuqiu's help to complete a lot of shooting missions. Of course, with Tang Qiuqiu's help, the number of enemy spaceships they took out doubled. Unlike Yudos and Tang Qiuqiu, Qiuqiu was so bored that it almost dozed off. It was very envious of Hui Mao, who was squatting outside and picking up bugs from time to play with them. Many people who flew past Yudo's spaceship and saw the fat cat calmly squatting on the fuselage of the spaceship could not help but curse. It was not their fault. This was really too unbelievable. Who would have thought that a cat would not have any protection in space and would be playing with bugs on a fighter jet in this battlefield? In fact, Hui Mao's color was not very eye-catching, but that was based on the premise that the cat was squatting there quietly. The current situation was that the cat was playing with a bug with its claws. The bug that was many times larger than itself was easily played with by the cat. Before the scythe-like claws could cut Hui Mao had already bitten it off. Hui Mao was not worried about being hit by stray bullets. First, as long as it was not a heavy weapon, it would not be able to injure it. Second, with Yudo's piloting skills, he could nimbly avoid the enemy's attacks. As long as Hui Mao stayed close to the fuselage, there was no need to worry about being hit. Qiuqiu curled up inside the spaceship and bit its palms. It also wanted to play with it. Whis was playing carelessly when Sillin's message suddenly came through. He told Hui Mao to return to the spaceship. There was a mission. When it heard Sillin said there was a mission, Hui Mao immediately shook off the big bug on its claws. It scratched its ears and prepared to leave, but Qiuqiu stopped it. Half a minute later, Hui Mao contacted Sillin. Sillin, Qiuqiu says it's bored and wants to follow us. Do you agree? Hui Mao asked. Sillin thinks for a moment and said, bring it along. Qiuqiu was very excited after getting permission. It put on the armor that Shimu had modified for it and was ejected from the spaceship. Snowball would be fine if it didn't wear any armor. It could jump for a long time without breathing, and it wasn't afraid of the space environment. However, its white fur was too eye-catching, so it could only put on the armor for now. Although there were some propulsion devices on the armor that allowed it to fly in space, Snowball was not familiar with this. It flew crookedly and directly crashed into a navigator fighter, leaving a dent in it. Qiuqiu grabbed onto Hui Mao's tail to stabilize itself. Even if it couldn't fly, it could still be carried by Hui Mao and avoid crashing into spaceships or spaceships. Meow, you fatso, cursed the gray cat whose tail was grabbed by Whis. Qiuqiu looked at Hui Mao's fat body and fell silent. Who asked it to not have wings? Thus, in this chaotic battlefield, a medium-sized fat cat with wings was dragging something unknown behind it. Everyone who saw this scene was amazed. What the hell is that thing? Some navigators tried to capture the unusual duo, but before they could even get close to Whis, they were blasted away by 3 light bullets fired from its mouth. I didn't know you had this trick up your sleeve, Qiuqiu said to Hui Mao through the communicator. Of course I did, Hui Mao said smugly. I've never seen you use it before. Because I like to keep a low profile. Qiuqiu. Fine, I'll keep quiet. The spaceship's hatch had already opened for them. After Hui Mao charged inside, he turned around and left Shueqiu behind. Before Shueqiu could regain his footing, he rolled out of the hatch and into the passage. Both Silin and Cheto had returned, and there was a spaceship parked next to them. It belonged to Shusag and Cheto. Huimao shook his fur and smoothed out the mess Shueqiu had made on his tail. Then, he jumped onto Silin's shoulder and asked, "When are we moving out? What are we going to do?" "We're going back to Little 11, Silin said. Just now, Yudi had lost contact with Little 11, and Cheto couldn't contact him either. The entire starship had been cut off from the outside world. "What happened to Little 11? Huimao asked. "It's not necessarily because of Little 11. Maybe someone entered the starship and cut off its communication with the outside world somehow. We can't contact the people on the starship, and the people on the starship can't send a message to the outside world," Cheto explained. "We should be able to contact Little 11 after we get to the starship. Right now, our mission is to return to the starship," Silin explained to Huimao and Shusag. "What about Carrie and the others?" Shusag asked. "They'll fly their spaceships to the starship and provide cover for us." Yudi ordered the spaceship to approach the starship. There were a lot of navigators around the area. Not even the 3rd B Squadron could spare much energy to help the 11th Squad starship. Moreover, the starship's energy shield had been deactivated for a while now. Many of the corvettes that were protecting the starship had been left behind. The A Squadron's Special Ops Squad was operating at the Central Battle Zone, and an elite squad was protecting the starship from the navigators' spaceships and spaceships. The elite squad had been following the starship closely, so they hadn't been left behind. The 11th Squad's energy shield had been deactivated, so there was no way they were running out of energy. After the spaceship approached the starship, it sped up and flew toward it. Vanguard didn't attack the spaceship after noticing that it was one of their own. Although they weren't too happy about the spaceship's approach, they didn't open fire. "Cheto, decrypt the hatch at the bottom of the starship," Silin said. He still couldn't contact Little 11 right now, and since he couldn't open the cabin door himself, Cheto would have to do it for him. In addition to the hatches on the surface, there were also some secret hatches that outsiders did not know about. Done. Cheto was done unlocking the hatch, and a small passage was opened. "Good luck," Yudi said. He wouldn't go in with Silin and the others. Tesoro was inside the spaceship as well, and they were far weaker than Silin and the others. They would only be a burden if they went with him. Silin gestured for them to move, and the hatch at the top of the spaceship opened. The armored Silin and the others quickly flew toward the secret hatch. This time, Huimao didn't let Shueqiu grab its tail. It hated having its tail grab the most. If it wasn't Shueqiu, it would have bitten anyone it didn't know, even if they were from Vanguard. This time, Cheto was the one who dragged Shueqiu into the secret hatch. Silin told him to train it more, or he wouldn't bring it along for the next space operation. Shueqiu promised repeatedly. It didn't want to sleep in a spaceship out of boredom again. Yudi drove the space plane away after Silin and the others had safely entered the secret entrance. However, he still followed them from the surrounding area, paying attention to the situation and cooperating with the elite squad to fight against the navigator. From the moment Yudi flew the spaceship to the moment Silin and the others entered the starship's secret hatch, to the moment Yudi flew the spaceship away from the starship, everything happened in less than 5 seconds. It looked like the spaceship had just brushed past the starship. Silin and the others had moved very quickly, and there was an object on the spaceship to hide their movements. After entering the secret hatch, Cheto tried to contact Little 11, but he couldn't. It was as if something was stopping him from doing so. "What do we do?" Cheto asked. "Take over control of Little 11. Before leaving, Silin had told Little 11 that if anyone tried to interfere with the starship's management system and couldn't put up a fight, then everything should stop. Therefore, when Silin discovered that the passageway and the rest of the starship was completely dark, he knew that Little 11 had shut down most of its internal functions. The only thing it could do was maintain flight, and it was piloted by someone else. Right now, it was in a dormant state because it couldn't control it anymore. The people outside couldn't control the starship through it, and they couldn't activate the starship's lighting system either. The starship was designed with a lot of unexpected situations in mind. Later on, when Little 11 was implanted with a super AI, they also made a couple of safety measures. This included the current situation. Other than Little 11, the starship had other management channels. It was just that they weren't known to outsiders. Moreover, even if a few professionals were to study the starship's management channels, it would be extremely difficult to gain control of them. This was because the management rights required a specific machine language, and a specific machine language at that. They waited for Cheto to regain control of the starship. Celine closed his eyes and sensed the situation around him. Although his surroundings were pitch black, he could still sense the changes in every detail in the surrounding area through the darkness. Cheto's management rights were very successful, and he didn't cause any disturbances. No one else on the starship would know that the management rights had changed hands. Celine could feel Huimao's claws stretching out uncontrollably from his shoulder. He knew that the bastard was very angry right now, but he had to endure it for the sake of the operation. It was hard on him. Although the starship was still in darkness, Celine didn't ask Cheto to turn on the illumination system. He didn't ask him to change the starship's current condition, but with their abilities, they could see that there were many places inside the starship that were damaged to varying degrees. There were bullet holes in the walls of the passage not far away, and those with keen noses could smell the faint scent of blood. Not to mention Huimao's night vision. Right now, he wanted nothing more than to chew up every bastard who dared to mess around in his territory, grind them to bits and spit them out. "There's no one within 100 meters of us," Cheto said. The starship was equipped with built-in surveillance cameras. The storage area was relatively hidden, and it was very difficult to detect when it was turned on. "What's the general situation right now?" Cheto projected an image from his eyes. It was a hologram of the starship's current structure, and it showed the surveillance targets inside the starship. From the image, they could see that there were more people gathered at the shooting field. There were more than 20 people inside the training field, and a group of people outside the training field. "They're trying to open the training field's door," Cheto said. He could sense that the training field's door was being damaged, and it wouldn't be long before it was removed. "Those people outside are probably Navigator's men," Cheto said. "Celine, didn't you say that there might be Mist's men as well?" Shusag asked in puzzlement. "The Mist's men won't be captured by the surveillance cameras. They're definitely here." Huimao interrupted Celine the second he was done. "Yes, they're here. I can smell their disgusting scent already. We can't let them get away this time." Celine walked a couple of steps toward the passage and crouched down at a spot on the floor. He wiped the liquid off the floor with his hand. "I remember this guy," Huimao said fiercely. "I remember him too." Celine wiped the liquid off his hand and stepped back. Then he said to Shusag and Shuechyo, "There are some liquids inside the starship that carry a kind of hard-to-detect smell. When they stick to a person's body, they'll follow the person's movements and mark their location like a signal. Then shouldn't we be careful later?" Shusag frowned. The darkness here was already a hindrance to begin with. Not only would it restrict their movements while concealing themselves, but it would also be incredibly difficult if they had to pay attention to the signal flare that he couldn't smell at all. He wasn't like that cat who could smell all kinds of hidden scents. "No, you don't have to pay attention to them." Celine took out a spray bottle. "Spray this on yourself." Shusag took it and sprayed it. He sniffed it hard but couldn't smell anything. "Before we left, I had Little 11 coat most of the starship with a scent membrane. Normal people wouldn't be able to detect it, but people who are sensitive to smell would be able to pick it up. Therefore, the scent film Celine had Little 11 apply after they left could now serve as a form of protection. Even if they accidentally stepped on the liquid that resembled a signal flare, it would still be able to cover their tracks to a certain extent. The armor has an automatic purification function, and this camouflage spray will make it easier to move around. Shusag nodded in realization. He had heard of similar things back when he was in the Mist Bodhisattva army, but he had never experienced it himself. It seemed like he still had a lot to learn. If Celine hadn't told him about it, he would have become an idiot who thought he was a moving target in the eyes of others. After they were done with the spray, Celine assigned a few tasks to each of them. They would work separately, and Cheto would be able to know everyone's location and progress through the starship system. Silin and Shusag would go one way, and Cheto and Shuechiyo would go the other way. Cheto would be able to guide Shuechiyo. While Silin and Shusag were approaching the training field, a couple of injured people were tending to their wounds while the others were spread out to protect Mogaz and the others. "Boss, the door won't hold for much longer. They'll be here in about a minute," said a member who had come with Stanley. Stanley waved his hand to show that he understood. The atmosphere in the training field was a little heavy. Of the 30 or so people who had come here, only 20 were left. Including Mogaz and the others, there were only 25 of them left. The navigators and the Mist's assassins were still waiting outside. More than half of their dead members were killed by the Mist's assassins, so Stanley wasn't worried about the navigators breaking down the door. He was worried about the assassins who were hiding somewhere. In fact, he didn't even know how many people the Mist had sent. Mogaz and the others also seized the opportunity to rest. They knew that they were going to fight a tough battle soon. Among the five, Mogaz, Phoebe, Kong Lujia, and Mao sat in 4 different directions, protecting Pangu. Pangu sat there quietly. No one knew what he was thinking. It was as if he couldn't sense the heavy atmosphere in the hall. He just sat there quietly and casually. However, Pangu's casualness sent a chill down Stanley's spine. Sometimes, a person without killing intent could have a devil living inside them. It was just that the devil hadn't shown its horns yet. Chapter 390. There were many ways to get to the training ground from the secret entrance, so Silin and the others split into 2 groups and headed in that direction. Even though it was pitch black, they could still see everything clearly with the visual aids on their armors. Moreover, this was their starship, so Silin and Shusag were all too familiar with the routes here. Silin and Shusag were walking along one of the side paths. Normally, no one would pass through this path, and judging from the scent and the traces they left behind, none of the navigators or the A Squadron who had taken over this place had passed through this path. The A Fleet and the navigators didn't pass through here, but that didn't mean the others didn't. Perched on Silin's shoulder, Hui Mao sniffed and sneezed in disgust. "That smells so bad." Shusag didn't say anything. Fine, he still didn't smell anything. As they continued forward, Hui Mao began to move his claws. Silin knew that something was getting closer and closer. Whis jumped out from Silin's shoulder and pressed down on an object that was slithering past the passageway with its paw. Then, it stomped down hard, and the object turned into a sticky puddle of water with a pop. Before Hui Mao could do anything, Shusag had already seen what it was. It looked like a rat, but it didn't have the fur of a rat. Instead, it was covered in a layer of metal-like armor. It didn't reflect any light in the dark, but it was obvious that the armor was tough. Its limbs were thick and strong, and they were far from the thin claws of a normal rat. Its claws were sharp enough to leave a mark on the metal walls of the tunnel, and when we pinned it to the ground, it opened its mouth to reveal its fangs. But before it could make a sound, Hui Mao stomped it to death. The thing that died under Weeze's claws gradually turned into a puddle of watery stains. However, it was a little sticky, and its sturdy outer armor and sharp claws had melted with its death. It looked a little sticky. Shusag didn't know what it was, but it was the liquid that Silin had told them about. What a strange creature. As soon as Shusag was done sighing, he noticed that there were other similar creatures heading their way. He was about to make a move, but Silin stopped him. "Let Whis take care of this first. Pay attention to your surroundings. I'm afraid that someone will be coming soon." Silin still remembered the man who brushed past him back in prison. Even if the man had disguised himself well at the time, Silin could still see the same emotions flashing in his eyes as the crimson eyes of the things Whis was stepping on. Crazy, cruel, bloodthirsty. Hui Mao was still moving at a speed that did not match its body size at all, trampling the mouse-like things that surrounded it into mucus. Shusag watched in amazement as Hui Mao stomped them to death. You can never judge a cat by its appearance. Silin, who had been standing there quietly all this time, gestured at Shusag. Shusag immediately went on alert. Silin was telling him that someone was coming over, but he didn't notice it. At least when he noticed it, he was just a little later than Silin. As expected of an assassin, his concealment was indeed very good. If it weren't for Silin's reminder, Shusag would have been in a more passive position. The other party also knew that Silin had sensed his approach, so he did not continue to hide. In response, a large number of rat-like creatures swarmed in from both the front and back of the tunnel. Some of them were larger and looked more difficult to deal with. Silin put his hand behind his back and signaled to Shusag. Silin would deal with the person who came over, while Shusag would deal with the rats. Shusag's specialized claws were already extended, and he took a few steps back to maintain a certain distance from Silin. This way, he could rush over to help out in the event of an emergency, look out for each other, and avoid getting hurt by accident. That way, he wouldn't restrict Silin's movements. Silin didn't pay attention to the rats swarming toward him. He had Hui Mao to help him deal with the rats in front of him, and Shusag to guard him from behind. Right now, he was focused on the person who was slowly making his way toward him. The figure grew closer and closer. After moving a little closer, it stopped 50 meters away from Silin. It seemed to be hesitating whether to come over or not. The figure didn't move, and neither did Silin. Both sides seemed to be waiting for the other to make the first move. More and more rats appeared, and almost half of the narrow path ahead was blocked. Hui Mao extended his claws like a meat grinder and ground them into slime. The ground was already covered in the disgusting slime. Hui Mao shook the slime off his hind legs in disgust. He could have just opened his mouth and swallowed the slime, but Hui Mao found it too disgusting and unpalatable, so he chose to use his claws instead. Silin didn't seem to care about what was happening in front of him. He just stood there quietly as if he didn't see it. Suddenly, Silin's figure flashed, and it was as if he had vanished from where he was standing. A hand stretched out from the layer of mucus where he had been standing. The hand had long fingernails, and the shape of the fingernails was similar to the claws of those mice. The outstretched hand didn't manage to grab Silin. Instead, before it could retract, it was cut off by Silin's slender sword. All of this happened in an instant. The severed arm melted into slime. However, this slime was different from the transparent slime from before. The slime from the arm was blood red. The man was injured. The figure that stayed 50 meters away began to melt and disappear from the head. That was not the real body of the man. The real body had been lurking among the rats. The Roten was very angry. He didn't expect his arm to be cut off so quickly. Silin's movement was too fast, and it was neither too early nor too late. Silin dodged the attack just before the Roten's outstretched hand could grab it. The Roten now understood that Silin was actually standing there to lure him into making a move and to cut him when he made his move. From the looks of it, Silin had the ability to dodge before he even revealed his hand. However, Silin didn't do so. She did it for the sake of slashing him with her blade. What puzzled the Roten was how the man in front of him knew where his real body was. Also, who was this man who cut off his arm and hand? The Roten knew all the high-level members of the Vanguard and the Navigator's first team who were strong in individual combat. However, he really didn't know the man in front of him. The Roten didn't know or remember the man he passed by in the first-class prison a few years ago, who he thought was a prison guard. However, Silin remembered that the reason why he was able to identify the real body of the Roten was that he remembered the smell of the Roten was different from those rat-like guys. If Shusag knew the reason, he might mourn for his poor sense of smell again. After cutting off the Roten's arm, Silin stood still again as if he was waiting for the Roten to strike again. The Roten was much more vigilant after being cut off. He didn't act rashly again. He knew that Silin was faster than him. In this case, he could wait for a better opportunity. There was more and more slime in the passage, and the air began to be filled with water vapor. The Roten lurked. He knew that as long as he didn't show up in his real body, Silin couldn't kill him. So what if he knew the general location of the Roten's real body? While the Roten was waiting for an opportunity, Silin said something strange. The Roten didn't understand it, but Shusag did. Because Silin was speaking Mist Bodhisattva language, and it was a secret code often used by the military in the language. Hui Mao and Silin were communicating in machine language, so even if it didn't understand the secret code, it could still understand what Silin was trying to say. While the Roten was still confused, Sillin moved his hand and a gun appeared in his hand. The moment the gun appeared, Shusag and Hui Mao both jumped and retreated. Bang! There was a soft muffled sound. After the bullet hit the place where the Roten was hiding, a layer of crystals quickly spread and covered the whole pool of slime. The crystals quickly thickened and tightly wrapped around the slime, sealing it. The water vapor in the air also quickly decreased. A shrill cry echoed in the passageway. The rats, who had been running around in a frenzy, seemed to have lost their sense of direction and were bumping into each other everywhere. It was Sillin who had asked Cheto to increase the humidity in the passage. However, even if the Roten knew that the humidity was rising fast, he wouldn't have expected Sillin to do this. The humidity was good for the Roten too. He was just happy that the higher the humidity, the more agile he would be in his slime form. But now, this benefit turned into a fatal one. Shusag looked at the situation in front of him and felt that half of his body was cold. In front of him, the place where the slime had accumulated was covered in a thick layer of ice, but it wasn't as cold as ice. It wasn't the formation of the ice that sent chills down Shusag's spine. Instead, it was the person lying at the front of the ice. Only his head and half of his torso remained, as if 2/3 of his body had been frozen solid. What's more, the remaining 2/3 of his body hadn't formed yet, and had been frozen inside the ice, along with the slime. It looked very creepy. The Roten was frozen in the strange ice from the chest down and couldn't struggle at all. He didn't even have time to transform into his human form. Only his upper arms were exposed, and his forearms were still in the ice. That was how he ended up like this. The Roten stuck out his long, spiky tongue and tried to scrape off the ice that had frozen him. But before he could do anything, a gun was pressed against his forehead. Bang! The shrill scream was still echoing in the passage, but the rats, who were bumping into each other, had turned into puddles of water. The only things left in the passage were the water stains that were gradually being cleaned up by the starship's cleaning system. After a while, the place would be cleaned up as if nothing had happened. A shrill scream rang out from the training ground. That was the shrill and horrifying cry that the Latin let out when it was frozen. It was Sillin who had asked Cheto to play it here. Whether it was the Navigator's men who were trying to break down the door outside or the Vanguard's A squad members who were tensed up inside the training ground, everyone stopped what they were doing at the same time when they heard the voice. Phoebe felt all the hair on her body standing on end when she heard the voice. Whose voice is that? A man next to Stanley swallowed and asked in a trembling voice. A person's voice contained a lot of things. It could reflect the emotions of the person when he was screaming, and it could also reflect part of the person's ability. When the voice wasn't disguised, the unique vibration in the sound waves was like a mark that reflected the person. Stanley's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Maybe the other members didn't know who the voice belonged to, but as the deputy commander of Vanguard, he clearly knew. Stanley just couldn't believe that the Roten would make such a hysterical scream. It sounded like the last cry before death. As a killer, the Roten even hid his traces, let alone deliberately making a sound. Moreover, the voice didn't sound fake. The emotions contained in it were too strong, so strong that those who heard it could empathize with it. This was also the reason why even Stanley couldn't help but have goosebumps. Who forced the Roten to make such a sound? Who had the ability to force the Roten into such a state? Both the Navigator's men and the A Squad's men, even Stanley himself, could only think of one word: Wuxia. In fact, not only the Navigator's and Vanguard's men, but also the Fog's men who were hiding in other parts of the starship thought that it was Wuxia's men. They couldn't think of any other answer except Wuxia's men. Vice Captain? A member of the Vanguard A team looked at Stanley with uncertainty. The Fog's men had already made them suffer a lot. If Wuxia's men were added to the mix, few of them would be able to make it out alive. Many people in the A Squad knew that their commander, Ji Feng, was not on good terms with Wuxia's men. Wuxia had once threatened Ji Feng. Therefore, if Wuxia's men were here, they would never help them. Stanley looked at Pango, who was sitting in the center of the crowd. He didn't know what to feel. He felt that he might not be able to protect Pango. Hey, Phoebe, guess what I'm thinking right now? Mogaz elbowed Phoebe, deliberately aiming for Phoebe's full chest. Phoebe slapped him away. Phoebe looked at Mogaz helplessly. Only this guy would speak in such a tone at a time like this. It's none of my business what you're thinking. Phoebe rolled her eyes at him. Mogaz glanced at the other members of the A squad around him. He covered his mouth with his hand and moved closer to Phoebe. I think the captain is here. Mogaz looked like he was whispering, but his voice wasn't soft at all. At the very least, the people guarding the outermost perimeter could hear him clearly in this deathly silent atmosphere. Captain? Which captain? Sillin, the captain of the 11th squad? A few people glanced at Mogaz disdainfully. You're still in the mood to joke at a time like this. Mogaz curled his lips. That was exactly what he felt. Sighed. Mogaz thumped his thigh and sighed. If you hadn't taken control of Little 11, the navigators wouldn't have had the chance to lock him up. If Little 11 wasn't locked up, he could have helped us. He could have shown us what's happening in other parts of the starship, caused some trouble for the navigators, and called for reinforcements. Reinforcements? Another person snorted. Do you think the navigators are pushovers? They can seal off the AI system and all signals. Do you really think they'd give us a chance to call for reinforcements? Come to think of it, I didn't think they'd be able to do this. I've never heard of them possessing this kind of technology before. The other A squad members nodded in agreement. Based on their understanding of the navigators, those bastards shouldn't have possessed this kind of technology. Who helped them? Translator, Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios because the navigator's men had stopped breaking down the door after hearing the shrill scream. The protective door of the training ground would not be broken down for the time being. The A-team members began to talk about who was secretly helping the navigator in order to ease the tension in their hearts. Only Phoebe was more silent than the rest. They knew that the reinforcements Mogaz was referring to weren't just the people outside the starship. He was referring to the robots lying in a secret place inside the starship. Without Little 11, Shikai, and Sillin, these robots wouldn't have made a move. Mogaz and the others didn't have the authority to order them around. They brought this upon themselves. After a brief pause, the breaking down of the door resumed. Attention, everyone. Prepare for battle. Stanley said. The red-hot metal was particularly eye-catching in the darkness. It was also a signal that the door was about to be broken. The high-energy cutter cut through the training ground's reinforced walls one layer at a time. It was now the last layer. When a big mouth was gradually formed, everyone in the training ground raised their vigilance to the highest level and prepared themselves according to the formation arranged by Stanley. Clang. The door was kicked open, and 3 grenades were hurled inside. Block them. A large protective shield was activated, and several protective shields were connected to block the shockwave when the 3 grenades exploded. These 3 grenades would not be too powerful. If they blew up the entire training ground, it would give the Vanguard members a chance to escape. Therefore, the navigator's choice of grenades was well thought out. After the grenades exploded, the protective barriers were almost completely destroyed. Kill them. Maintain formation. Laser weapons would only expose themselves in an environment like this. That was why everyone chose to use metal bullets. However, there shouldn't be any light, but after the 2 sides fired, they found that the bullets created spots of light in the middle of the 2 sides. It was as if there was a transparent energy barrier in the middle. Click, click, click. The lights in the training ground came on. Gurgle. Something rolled out of nowhere to the middle of the 2 sides and stopped near the protective barrier. Under the sudden light, the rolling thing attracted the attention of both sides. It looked like an ice cube. In this ice cube, there was the bloodthirsty and violent eyes of the Roten, and his facial expression was distorted by the pain of being frozen in half. A voice rang out in the training ground. What should I do to you guys for messing up my starship like this? Chapter 391. The voice came from speakers in all directions of the training ground. From the moment the protective shield appeared, everyone knew that something had gone beyond their expectations. The training ground must have been equipped with a protective shield, but after the navigator's people shut down the starship system control, The vanguard people trapped inside could not open the shield, and the distress signal could not be sent out. The people outside had no idea what was going on here. As long as the starship did not stop, the people outside could not easily enter the training ground. To activate the protective shield in the training ground, the control system must be connected. Plus, the lights inside the training ground were on, which meant that the control system was no longer blocked. What the Navigator and Vanguard members were concerned about was who was in control of the system. Stanley felt his scalp go numb as he looked at the ice next to the protective shield. It was not an illusion. It was really the Rodin. He did not expect the Rodin to be killed, and in such a way. It seemed that the Rodin did not have a good time before he died. The head sealed in the ice, the expression on its face, and the voice he heard a few minutes ago. Stanley felt that he was breathing very carefully. Was it really Wux's people who were able to kill the Rodin? But if it was Wux's people, why did they have to raise the protective shield to protect themselves and the others? Stanley knew the Rodin, and so did several people on the A-team. Many people on the Navigator's side also recognized the Rodin's face. Because of this, the atmosphere suddenly became strange. The room was bright, but it felt even darker and more dangerous than before. What was lurking around here? Drip, a drop of blood fell on the floor and bloomed. Everyone raised their heads and looked up. The height of the training ground was about 30 meters, and on the wall at a place 20 meters above the ground, a person was standing steadily on a metal pole used for climbing training. When did this person appear? No one noticed it at all. It was completely silent. If it were not for the sound of liquid dripping in this strange silence, no one would have noticed the person standing there. This person was wearing armor, which Mogaz and the others were very familiar with. This was the armor unique to the members of the 11th team. However, the sound of liquid dripping did not come from this person. Instead, it came from the person in his hand who was no longer breathing. Tires. Stanley recognized the man whose chest had been pierced and whose blood was dripping from the wound. Tires was also a member of the Fog. He was known as Swift Blade Tires. His blade was shaped like a tear, and it was extremely fast. Many of his victims didn't even have time to react before they lost their senses. Like the Rodin, Tires had caused a lot of trouble for the A-team not long ago and caused them heavy losses. But now, this killer with the swift knife Tires was being held in his hand like garbage. His face was deformed, his chest caved in, and many bones were broken. First, it was Rodin's head, then Swift Blade Tires. The two Fog killers were slaughtered one after another. Even the Navigators, who thought they were well prepared, felt that things had gone beyond their expectations. In contrast to Stanley and Navigator's worry and anxiety, Mogaz and the others were much more relaxed. At the very least, the people who came were on his side, and not Wuxia or other enemies. Captain! Mogaz jumped for joy. It really is you guys. Phoebe and the others were also overjoyed, but they didn't jump to their feet like Mogaz. Mogaz was so excited that he felt like he was the one who had killed 2 Mist members in a row. He was so happy that he couldn't care less about Stanley's glare and giggled to himself. Stanley's eyebrows twitched. He ignored Mogaz and turned his attention to the man perched on the metal pole. Sillin? Stanley asked. The voice that came from the speaker just now belonged to Sillin. However, Stanley's mood was completely different now. Why did Sillin appear at this time? How did he get in? The man perched on the metal pole didn't say anything. He loosened his grip and tossed Tires to the ground. Tires, who was in free fall, smashed into the hard floor of the training ground with a bang. Everyone in the training ground tensed up with this sound, and their hearts trembled. Someone on Navigator's side quickly pulled out a gun and fired at them the moment he let go of Tires. Over there was no protective barrier. The barrier only surrounded the center of the training ground in a cylindrical shape. The man perched on the metal pole was outside the barrier. The shooting was almost silent. In addition, the person who fired the shot was a veteran. He grasped the timing and had sufficient accuracy. However, when the bullet hit the person on the metal pole, it made a clanging sound, and then the bullet bounced off. The man on the metal pole was completely unharmed. Bulletproof armor. That was what everyone thought. As soon as they realized the bulletproof armor's function, the leader of Navigator's team felt a chill run down his spine. It was an instinct he had honed through life and death situations. Just as he reacted and opened his mouth to shout the word little, before the word heart left his mouth, a figure passed through their ranks. The shooter was pierced by 5 specialized scythe-like finger bones. Shusag quickly fled after the hit. The Navigator's team reacted quickly and fired at him. However, Shusag's evasion speed and the armor's defensive function didn't really hurt him. Shusag kept the sole of his armor glued to the wall and ran perpendicular to it. Some of the Navigator's team kept firing at Shusag, some kept an eye on the man perched on the metal pole, and the rest stayed on alert. Behind the protective shield, the A-team members felt that it was ridiculous when they saw this. They were the ones who had been ordered to protect Shusag, but now they had to stand inside the barrier and watch everything like bystanders. Shusag's pursuers couldn't hurt him even if they managed to hit him. Some of them even switched to laser weapons, but they couldn't do anything to him. The armored Shusag was nimbly dodging around the battlefield. Wait! The leader of Navigator's team gestured. He sensed something was wrong. The man perched on the metal pole hadn't moved since he dropped tires, and the man who killed his own team member was dodging. Did he not have any backup plan? Soon enough, the leader of the group made up his mind. Retreat. He gestured for everyone to retreat at full speed. But it was too late. A hail of bullets rained down on the Navigator's team before they could even get close to the broken door. The Navigator's team was also wearing armor that could block bullets to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. The visors on their armor allowed them to see the invisible thing at the door. They didn't know what it was. All they could see was a vague outline of a human. "Watch out, invisible people!" one of the Navigator's team members shouted. Invisible people? Stanley was perplexed. He recalled that there was indeed a member of the 11th Squad who possessed the invisibility ability, but that member was only a little girl. Furthermore, there weren't just one invisibility ability in front of him. There were many of them, and they didn't look like little girls either. Stanley glanced at Mogaz and the others thoughtfully. The excitement in Mogaz's eyes told him that they knew the reason behind this. "What's that, Phoebe?" Stanley asked. He didn't ask Mogaz. That guy wasn't reliable. Phoebe paused for a moment before answering. "Reinforcements." "What kind of answer is that?" Stanley wasn't satisfied with this answer. "Didn't I tell you? If Little 11 wasn't sealed off, these reinforcements would have been able to help us a long time ago," Mogaz said. "The captain kept them here so that Little 11 could be released if he was in danger, but..." Mogaz shrugged and didn't say anything else. The A Squad was the one who forced Little 11 to surrender his authority and gave the Navigator's team a chance to seal off the ship's defenses. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in such a sorry state right now, and they wouldn't have lost so many people. Before Sillin left, he told Stanley not to go overboard and give the starship some freedom. But Stanley didn't listen to him at all. Was he to blame for Sillin? Was he to blame for not making himself clear? It wasn't strange. Every team had their own developments and secrets. This wasn't the military. This was the rule of the Hunter Corps. Taking control of the starship and kicking out the crew was already a little out of line. They only had themselves to blame for this. Stanley tried to recall what Sillin said during the handover, but he couldn't remember it. He was so focused on getting the 11th Squad out of here that he didn't pay attention to Sillin's words at all. He couldn't remember it now. I think Sillin said something else. Stanley was in a dilemma. On the other side of the shield, the Navigator's men were being suppressed. Not only did they have to fight with the invisible people, but they also had to pay attention to their close-range attacks. The invisible people moved very fast, like well-trained soldiers. Their attacks were fatal, but they didn't have a murderous aura. Quite a few of their members had already been killed. "Seal off the control system again," the leader ordered. "No, we can't seal it off," a man holding an elliptical device shouted. He didn't know what was going on. The device clearly said that the starship system had been sealed off, but someone was clearly still controlling it. Screech, the leader of the Navigators, slashed an invisible man in half. As soon as they clashed, They realized that these invisible men were not afraid of bullets. The threat of bullets to these invisible men was limited. Therefore, when it came to close combat, they would just use lightsabers or other cold weapons. The invisible man that was split in half revealed his physical body, but what shocked everyone was that what was revealed from the cross-section of the severed body was not the flesh of a human, but machinery. They're robots. Fuck, why are there robots here? Why were there so many robots here? Also, why were their movements and combat techniques so similar to humans? Were they from the Robert family? Everyone thought of the Robert family immediately. Mogaz grew even more smug when he saw everyone's reaction. Phoebe curled her lips in annoyance. But to be honest, this did give her a sense of pride. The Robert family wasn't the only ones with robots like this. Wuxia wasn't the only ones who could fight against the mist, and the A Squad wasn't the only ones who could do great things. The 11th Squad can do it all the same. The robots were enough of a headache for the navigators, but what happened next was even more frustrating. The gravitational field was suddenly deactivated. Without the sudden loss of gravity, the navigators didn't even have time to react before 7 of them were killed by the flying robots. It looked like a one-sided massacre. The navigators tried to break out of the encirclement, but when they finally did, they were smashed into the wall and flattened to a pulp. A giant door god stood guard at the entrance. Shueqio's body swelled several times in size after his transformation. His fleshy hands were as hard as steel, and his reflexes were quick and agile. He killed a person with a single slap. Even if he didn't die, he wasn't far from it. Snowball was responsible for taking care of these people who broke out of the encirclement. However, Sillin also told him that if the other party used grenades or other artillery weapons, he could just dodge and let these people escape. There were robots in charge of cleaning up other parts of the starship anyway. Shueqio was responsible for taking care of the escapees while Mogaz was yelling at the other side of the barrier. Come on, Shueqio. Kill that bastard. There's one on the left. Watch out for grenades. Behind. 2 of them have escaped. Veins popped out on Stanley's forehead. He wanted nothing more than to tape Mogaz's mouth shut. Just as Stanley was about to lose his temper, Mogaz suddenly stopped and muttered, "That's weird. Why isn't Mr. Cat here?" Phoebe and the others were curious as well. Given the cat's personality, it wouldn't miss out on a chance to vent its anger and show off. If Sillin was here, then Mr. Cat must be here as well. But what was the cat doing? Who's Mr. Cat? A member of the A Squad couldn't hold it in any longer. Every single person in the 11th Squad, or even inhuman, was shocking to them. Why would someone who had the ability to kill the assassins of the Fog stay in a small team that had just been formed? If it were them, they would have joined the A Squad a long time ago. Their strength was more than enough to secure a spot in the A Squad. Also, if the 11th Squad was this strong, why didn't the A Squad give them any information about what was going on? Mr. Cat is Mr. Cat, our captain's pet, Mogaz answered. Isn't it that fat gray cat over there? Another A Squad member gestured with his hands and asked. Yes, that's it. Mr. Cat is the strongest in our squad after the captain, and Cheto too. They're the strongest in the 11th Squad. And who's Cheto? Someone asked. Mogaz was about to answer when Phoebe lashed him with her whip. What the hell are you talking about at a time like this? Mogaz finally shut his mouth and turned his attention to the battlefield. There weren't many navigators left on the battlefield. 7 or 8 of them had broken out of the encirclement, and the rest had either been killed by the robots or killed by Shueqio. The leader of the navigators' team was still here. He and a few other team members held back the androids and killed a few androids. It had to be said that the strength of this leader was really good. It was at this moment Stanley noticed that the man standing on the metal pole had finally moved. Since there was no gravity, he used the thrusters on his armor to fly toward the leader. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the leader. Bang! The leader only had enough time to block the punch with his sword, but he was knocked back by the force of the blow. He might have been sent flying if his armor wasn't holding him in place. A fist-shaped dent had appeared on the sword that blocked the punch. It couldn't withstand a second attack. The remaining 3 navigators wanted to help, but before they could turn around, one of them felt a chill in his chest. He had been pierced. Shusag flung the dead navigator aside and went on to finish off the remaining 2. Crack, crack, bang. The leader of the navigators was pinned against the wall by Cheto's neck. Both of his arms were broken, and several of his ribs were broken. Crack. The sound of bones breaking entered the battlefield again. The leader's neck had been broken. The moment the leader breathed his last, the person who was strangling him quickly retreated. Boom! The place had exploded. In fact, the leader wanted to detonate another bomb, which was placed near the energy cabin. As long as the leader gave the order or his own heartbeat stopped, the bomb would be detonated and the entire starship would be blown up. However, when he was grabbed by the neck and knew that he would not be able to live for long, he gave the order to detonate the bomb, but he did not find any movement. He didn't have time to react. The hands around his neck were already pressing down on him. A heartbeat stop was the only way to detonate the small bomb. Even so, the explosion shook the entire training ground like crazy. If it weren't for the protective barrier around the training ground, Mogaz and the others would have been caught in it already. Shusag and Shuechiyo had flown away and found cover before the explosion happened, so they weren't hurt at all. "Hey, Captain, are you all right?" Mogaz shouted at the messy training ground. Everyone turned to look at him as well. Not even armor could protect them from a bomb of this magnitude at such a close distance. The gravity system had been reactivated, and the smoke and dust from the explosion was slowly dissipating. A man walked out of the smoke and dust and grew clearer and clearer as Mogaz shouted. As the figure walked out, everyone saw the electric light flashing on the figure's body. Mogaz's mouth fell open. Cheto! Where was Sillin? If this man was Cheto, then where was Sillin? Chapter 392. The barrier around the training field had been shut down, and the people inside had walked out. Mogaz walked up to Cheto quickly and asked, "Are you all right, Cheto?" Cheto was covered in lightning and missing a piece of his shoulder. He looked like he was in a pretty bad shape. Even though he was wearing a suit of armor, it only served to cushion the impact. However, after Cheto put away his armor, the wound on his body started healing and returning to its original state in no time at all. The A squad couldn't believe that Cheto had healed himself in just a few breaths' time after taking the bomb at close range. Shusag and Shuechiyo also walked up to Cheto and stood next to him. They were allies now, and Shusag didn't trust the A squad at all. He didn't care if they had to fight each other. Everyone except the 11th squad was an outsider to him. Cheto didn't answer Mogaz's question. Instead, he controlled the projectors in the training field to display the battle situation in other parts of the starship. Some robots were doing cleaning work there. The images were very clear, showing the battle between the robots and the escaped navigators. The command room had regained control of the starship as well. Under Cheto's control, the starship's barrier was raised once more. However, the starship itself didn't slow down at all. When the protective shield appeared on the surface of the starship, Carrie and the others knew that Sillin and the others had succeeded. The starship no longer had to endure the bombardment of the enemy aircrafts outside. The Sentinel defense system and AI weapons inside the starship had been activated, and after issuing a warning, they started attacking the enemy aircrafts around the starship. Cheto called Shusag and Shuechiyo over to clean up the mess inside the training field. Although they had the help of the robots, there were still some things they had to do on their own. Cheto needed to gather some information on the dead navigators. Stanley didn't know what to say when he saw the people in front of him going about their business as if no one else was around. Should he say thank you? Shouldn't he? Should he say hello? How should he say hello? It wasn't easy for Stanley to swallow his pride. That was why Stanley didn't say anything. Mogaz was the only one who was asking questions around Cheto. Where's the captain, Cheto? Is Lord Cat here too? Where are the others? They have other things to do. Shuechiyo, that's still useful. Don't break it, Cheto said to Shuechiyo, who was playing with the ice block on Rodon's head like a ball. Shuechiyo had already put away his armor and returned to his original furry white bear form. Hearing Cheto's words, Shuechiyo obediently placed the things in his hands on the ground. After scratching his butt, Shuechiyo, who could not bear the loneliness, wandered around the training ground again. He confiscated the firearms, lightsaber, and other tools left behind by Navigator to fill up his toy library. The members of the A-team were a little nervous when the fatty approached. Now, the fatty looked very simple and honest and cute, but when they thought of this guy crushing a person to death with a slap, they couldn't help but feel nervous. With a dire beast so close to him, it would be strange if he wasn't nervous. However, Shueisha didn't pay attention to the A-team members. He was focused on finding new toys. When he saw a new submachine gun in the hands of a member of the A-team, Shueisha walked over and stared at the gun. The man who was being stared at by Snowball stiffened. He looked at the fatty who was staring at the gun in his hand without blinking, then looked at Stanley, who was deep in thought and did not seem to be paying attention to them. He swallowed his saliva and carefully said, "You want this?" Shueisha scratched his ear with his paw and said, "Let me play with it for a bit. I'll return it to you later." "Will I really return it later? Also, will I really not get into trouble?" That being said, the person handed the gun to Cheto anyway. Someone shook his head disapprovingly, but he didn't say anything because Shusag was looking at him. They had all seen Shusag slaughter the navigators just now, and they didn't want to make an enemy out of him unless it was absolutely necessary. Even though they were all members of Vanguard, they treated each other like strangers. In fact, everyone in the A-team was confused by the fact that the strongest members of the 11th Squad were Sillin, Cheto, and Lord Cat. Shusag wasn't mentioned. They had seen Cheto's strength for themselves, and they had a better understanding of Shusag's. If everyone in the 11th Squad was as strong as Shusag, then they would have to re-evaluate their opinion of the 11th Squad. But, was Sillin really that strong? He wasn't that old, was he? Some people were wondering about the reason behind this when they were suddenly pulled back to reality by a series of gunshots. On the other side, Snowball was holding the submachine gun and shooting at the severely deformed door that was cut by the navigator. It was about 70 meters away from the door. After a series of shots, it left a circle of bullet marks on the door. It was a simple task for most people, but the white fatty in front of them wasn't a human. He was a special kind of animal. And this was just the beginning. Shueisha scratched his ears after firing the submachine gun. No one knew what he was thinking. Then, he moved his fat palms and disassembled the submachine gun just when everyone thought he was going to break it in half. It was hard to imagine how Shueisha had disassembled the submachine gun with his fat and clumsy palms, but it was an undeniable fact. After disassembling the submachine gun, Shueisha studied the parts for a moment. Then, as if he had lost interest, he reassembled the parts and handed them back to the person. Compared to Tang Qiuqiu's gun, Shueisha didn't find this one attractive at all. The person who received the submachine gun was still a little dazed. He only came back to his senses after his comrade patted him on the back. The first thing that came to his mind was, "Fuck, why did that white fatty look at me with disdain when he returned the submachine gun?" Mogaz asked about the starship again, but Cheto didn't say anything. Cheto didn't tell him where Sillin was. He could sense Sillin's current location. The reason he didn't kill the leader of the navigators right away was because he wanted to confirm that the detonation signal of the bomb in the energy cabin was successfully disrupted. It was only after the navigator gave the order to detonate the bomb and nothing happened that Cheto finally felt reassured enough to kill him. On the other side of the starship, inside a side passage leading to the energy cabin. The lights inside the starship had been turned on, so the passage was brightly lit. At this moment, a person was slowly walking toward them from the corner of the passage. Although the passage was brightly lit, it was impossible to see the person's face clearly. The person was wearing a cloak and a hat, and the light shone through the brim of the hat and cast a shadow. The person was fiddling with a device on his wrist in an attempt to contact someone, but he discovered that he couldn't send a message. The device had been disrupted. Suddenly, the device on his wrist vibrated and displayed a notification. The person paused for a moment when he saw the notification. He looked a little incredulous before he quickened his pace. However, he only took 2 steps before he came to a stop and looked up ahead. There was a person standing about 30 meters away from the other end of the passage. Blue succubus? Celine looked at the cloaked person not far away and asked. He was here to stop the last of the 3 Fog members on the starship. He was also the opponent that Scylla had met once before and had even gotten beaten up by him. After Scylla revealed her identity, Blue Phantom pulled down her cloak and revealed a blue-skinned woman. "The captain of the 11th Squad, Scylla?" Blue Phantom asked. They had seen some of the information about the 11th Squad before they came here, so it was only natural that she knew about Scylla as the captain of the 11th Squad. However, she couldn't understand why Scylla would appear on this starship again after he had handed over his authority. Regardless, the only thing Blue Phantom wanted to do right now was to detonate the bomb Navigator's men had planted inside the energy cabin. They had already lost 2 people in this mission, and if they couldn't complete it, there was no need for her to return. She didn't care even if she had to blow up the entire starship and kill everyone. In any case, she was the only one left of the 3 who had come here, and the other 2 signals on the vitals display on her wrist had already disappeared. She didn't need to worry about anything anymore. The moment the blue succubus finished her last word, she charged towards Scylla fiercely. Straight blue light blades extended from her hands, and her eyes were cold and emotionless. It was just like Scylla's memories. Kill Scylla, then go to the energy cabin and detonate the bomb. This was Blue Phantom's current mission. Ping! The blue blades of light were blocked with a hiss. Blue Phantom's pupils shrank when she saw the slender black blade that had blocked her blades of light. "It's you!" It wasn't that Lan Mei recognized Celine, who they had fought before, but that she recognized the blade. "It's you. You killed Osculo." That was what Blue Phantom was trying to say. Blue Phantom was on high alert. Several blue blades of light crisscrossed and stabbed at Scylla. The crisscrossed blades of light wove into a deadly net, and the surrounding walls were already covered in crisscrossed marks. Scylla didn't wear his armor, nor did he take out his water gun. He didn't plan on using his Purgatory Thunder Snake either. All he did was wave the long blade in his hand and block the incoming blades of light. He kept on defending, retreating step by step. It looked like Scylla was being suppressed and at a disadvantage. But Blue Phantom knew that the person in front of her wasn't simple. There were no unnecessary movements. Every time Scylla swung his blade, he was able to perfectly block the blades of light. No matter what angle they came from, no matter how many blades of light came at him at the same time, he would always be able to block them. It was different. It was different from the feeling of being unable to attack or block. In Scylla's eyes, these flashing blue blades of light no longer gave off the frightening feeling they had in the past. They were just like ordinary blades, blades that he could definitely avoid with absolute certainty. It wasn't that the blue blades of light had lost their power, but that this level of power was no longer enough to suppress Scylla. Whether it was the speed at which he swung his blade or the way in which he attacked each blue blade of light. Scylla felt as if there was a machine running at high speed inside his brain. It recorded every instant of his movements, analyzed his next move, and calculated the best way to deal with it. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The blue blades of light collided with the long blade of light, and the blue blades of light slashed against the wall. The blue blades of light on Blue Phantom's hands and fingers converged. There was only one blue blade of light in each hand, and the light they emitted was very strong. You could feel the energy colliding with each other. But Osculo's blade was indeed a good one. Even Blue Phantom's strengthened blade of light couldn't cut through it. Scylla blocked Blue Phantom's double blade attack again, but it was different this time. After blocking the attack, Scylla quickly retreated. The next moment, several deep marks appeared on the place where he had been standing and the walls on both sides of the tunnel. Blue Phantom didn't only have 2 hands. It was just that she always gave people the impression that she only had 2 hands. Now, Blue Phantom had 2 more hands, each of which was connected to a blue blade of light. It was a combination of finger blades of light. Blue Phantom didn't expect her surprise attack to fail, and it didn't even touch the corner of Scylla's shirt. Since this attack didn't work, it was obvious that it would be difficult to hurt Scylla later. Continuing would only buy more time. Retreat first, then find a chance to go to the energy cabin, or find another way to destroy the starship. Blue Phantom had just thought of retreating when she suddenly felt a chill run through her body. The air around her seemed to freeze. Every nerve in her body was trembling, as if she didn't know how to react. The blue succubus waved her arm in reverse according to the conditions. Her 6 arms instinctively bent, and the blue blades of light formed a protective net in front of her. This was a habit she had developed countless times. Bang! Blue Phantom's eyes widened as she watched the 3 arms on her left fall. It was too fast. She couldn't react at all. The blue blades of light that had been fighting against the long blade had now fallen to the ground along with the broken arms. Even the blue blades on the hands had disappeared, leaving only the severed hands. She didn't even finish a word. A line of blood extended from the right side of Blue Phantom's neck down to the left side of her waist. Blue blood, darker than her blue skin, flowed out of the wound, and it became more and more turbulent. But Blue Phantom felt that if Scylla could kill Osculo, then it would be difficult for her to kill Scylla. After fighting so many times, Blue Phantom knew that she wouldn't be able to easily finish off the person in front of her. But the last attack made Blue Phantom understand that Scylla hadn't used his full strength. In that moment, Blue Phantom felt like she was facing Osculo, the person who was on par with her boss, Nibila. Scylla clearly had this ability, so why did he fight with her for so long? Was he playing with her? She couldn't understand why Scylla, who had killed Osculos and become so powerful, would willingly stay in a contemptible squad like Vanguard. Why didn't anyone in Jill pay attention to him? Why didn't anyone notice him when he had grown to such a level? Why didn't anyone notice him? Why didn't anyone notice him? This was what Blue Phantom didn't understand even in death. If they knew about this person, Nibila and the other stronger members of the Fog would have personally dealt with him instead of just sending the 3 of them to their deaths. Like Roten, Lan Mei had completely forgotten about the young man she had chased in the level 1 prison. He was someone she didn't even care about. But Scylla still remembered them. Scylla put away his knife and made a gesture. Not far behind Scylla, a robot slowly materialized into existence. Take her. The robot walked over and dragged Blue Phantom, who was already dead but still had a look of disbelief on her face before she died. Blue Phantom's eyes were still wide open. She didn't understand what had happened, nor did she expect Scylla to have such an ability. She died with her eyes wide open. Scylla didn't look at Blue Phantom, who was being dragged by the robot. He walked to the other end of the passage, where the power cabin was. There was a cat squatting at the door of the power cabin. The cat was nodding its head like a chicken pecking at rice. He could still sleep peacefully in this situation. Scylla asked Hui Mao to squat here and guard. He was to guard the bomb and prevent it from exploding. He was also to pay attention to the surroundings and prevent people from approaching this place. When Scylla approached, Hui Mao's ears twitched. Then, he opened his squinted eyes and yawned. There was something suspicious stuck to his fangs. How many people did it swallow? Scylla asked. 2 or 3. I can't remember. As he spoke, Hui Mao yawned again. He stuck out his butt, stretched his back, shook his fur, and looked sideways at the person being dragged by the robot behind Scylla. Oh, it's already taken care of? Then let's hurry to the training ground and meet up with Cheto and the others. Hui Mao looked a little impatient. Wait, let's take care of the bomb first. Scylla grabbed Hui Mao, who was about to leave, and walked into the power cabin. With Hui Mao's help, Scylla took some time to take care of the bomb. Only after this bomb was taken care of would they be able to focus on other things. Otherwise, it would become a hidden danger. Half an hour later, Scylla passed the processed bomb to another robot. The robot hugged the bomb and threw it out of the starship. After the bomb was thrown out, Scylla finally turned around and tidied up the somewhat messy power cabin. Then he grabbed Hui Mao and left. Scylla, shouldn't we ask for compensation this time? Hui Mao asked while waving his paws. Yes, that's for sure. At the training ground, the A squad members were huddled together and discussing something. Cheto and Shusag were busy with their own things, and Shuechiyo was having fun on his own. Suddenly, Cheto looked at the door. Scylla is back. Everyone in the training ground followed Cheto's gaze and looked toward the door. Footsteps and the familiar voice of Fat Cat entered the room. Finally, Scylla appeared. Shusag relaxed when he saw that Scylla was safe and sound. Hey, Captain, where are you guys going? Mogaz was about to say something, but he choked when he saw the person being dragged by the robot behind Sillin. The other A Squad members choked as well. That was the third one. Chapter 393. The fog had only sent 3 assassins, or at least only 3 of them were known to the public. Moreover, all 3 of them had caused a lot of damage to the A Squad. But what about now? First it was radon, then tires, and now the blue succubus that was being held by the robot. Stanley had to admit that he had made a mistake this time. Ji Feng had told him not to underestimate Sillin too much before he came here. Stanley didn't pay much attention to it at the time. After this incident, he realized that Ji Feng might have underestimated Sillin and the small squad behind Sillin. What the hell happened to this place? Hui Mao looked very unhappy when he saw the state of the training ground. Although he would still demand compensation from the A Squad later, no one would be happy to see their turf destroyed like this. "I'm so happy to see you again, Lord Cat." Mogaz ran up to Hui Mao and explained what happened just now to him. Everyone in the A team turned to Mogaz in unison when he called out, "Lord Cat." Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Hui Mao's nose twitched a little before he jumped off Sillin's shoulder and ran up to the deformed metal door. Then he sniffed it, moved his ears, and lifted the thick metal door with his paw. It was so thick that it could easily crush a person to death. The A Squad members couldn't help but feel their faces twitch when they saw this. Mogaz wasn't lying. They knew that the cat was a little special, but they didn't think it would be this special. Hui Mao didn't care what the others thought of him. He was after the thing under the metal door. After the thick metal door was lifted, everyone saw a person who was crushed to a bloody pulp under the door. However, Hui Mao's target wasn't the navigator, but the thing in the man's hand. Hui Mao picked up the deformed instrument with his paw and tossed it to Sillin. "This thing is a little special," he said. Cheto looked at the seriously damaged device. He hadn't paid attention to it before, and the device itself had lost all of its functions due to damage. That was why he hadn't paid attention to it when he was cleaning up the training ground. He didn't expect Hui Mao to be the first one to find it. "What is this?" Sillin asked. "I don't know." Hui Mao shook its paws to get rid of the blood and debris on its paws. "It feels a little special." "That's the device the navigator used to seal the starship's control system," said Stanley, who finally found a chance. Sillin shot Stanley a glance before passing the device to Cheto. "Keep it for now. We'll show it to Shimu later." "All right." Cheto accepted the device. There were some things he needed to ask Hui Mao later. Cheto was inferior to Hui Mao in judging things without relying on machine language and signal response, so he needed to improve himself in this area. Cheto had already taken care of a lot of things in the training ground and on the starship, so Sillin didn't need to worry about them anymore. "Vice Commander Stanley, I think we need to have a good talk after this incident is over," said Sillin while looking at Stanley. "I think so too." Stanley didn't know how he should treat Sillin right now, but it was true that they needed to have a talk. There were too many things he didn't understand about the 11th Squad, and how Vanguard should treat the 11th Squad from now on was a headache. Of course, now wasn't the time for a talk. The war between the 2 hunter regiments wasn't over just yet. Stanley needed to ask about the A Squad's current situation, but he didn't know how the other higher-ups were doing right now. While Stanley was contacting the front line, Sillin went to talk to the Mogaz Quintet, especially Pango. Pango was on the miss-assassination list. While Sillin was talking to Pango, Pango told Sillin about his background. It was true that Pango was Ji Feng's son, but his mother wasn't a member of Vanguard. She was a member of Wuxia. Back then, Wuxia obtained 2-star map fragments of spell. Ji Feng had one, and the other was hidden somewhere else. Pango's mother betrayed Wuxia after she found the last star map fragment and found spell with Ji Feng's help. Spell, like Tear of God, was a kind of potion. However, spell contained a whole set of genes, and this set of genes would give a person a special ability. After Pango's mother drank the gene medicine, her strength skyrocketed. Later on, during a mission, they encountered an accident. The spaceship entered a star area with an abnormal magnetic field. Coupled with the sudden outburst of stellar activity in that area, the ion storm, and all sorts of other unexpected events gathered together. In order to save Ji Feng and a few of Vanguard's higher-ups, Pango's mother did her best to protect them. However, she was already 7 months pregnant at that time, and her body was greatly affected. After that crisis, Pango arrived early, but his mother couldn't open her eyes again. Saving Pango had exhausted the last of her strength. At the time, many people thought that a premature baby who cried out under such circumstances wouldn't survive even in the best nursery. However, the baby's vitality was so strong that the entire nursery exploded when he cried. Later, Ji Feng and the others discovered that the spell gene originally found in Pango's mother was successfully duplicated in Pango's body. Not only did Pango inherit his mother's and father's high-level genes, but he also had the spell gene. Pango had 2 sets of genes at the same time, and as he grew up, he also slowly fused the 2 sets of genes in his body. Unlike his mother, Pango was born with 2 sets of genes. Compared to his mother, he had a bigger advantage. The 2 sets of genes in his body were much more compatible. His mother didn't fuse the 2 sets of genes before she died. She only fused 1/3 of the genes, but Pango managed to fuse 1/3 of the genes when he was 10. Ji Feng valued this child very much, so he didn't expose him. Just like Wuxia said, Ji Feng had many children in the open, so he didn't pay too much attention to them. However, he couldn't afford to lose Pango. The higher-ups who were saved by Pango's mother also helped to keep this secret. If nothing went wrong, this child would replace Ji Feng as the next leader of Vanguard, and he would be even stronger than Ji Feng. Pan Gu was the one who made most of his decisions. Even though he appeared to be a very easygoing person, Ji Feng had never been able to persuade Pan Gu to change his mind even once after Pan Gu had grown up. Back then, when Vanguard sent a large number of members to the other teams, Pan Gu had chosen to join the 11th Squadron. At the time, Ji Feng didn't want to, but he let him be. At the same time, he secretly arranged Mao, Kong Lujia, and the rest of the stronger members to join the 11th Squad. However, Ji Feng didn't expect that other than Pango, only 4 people would remain in the 11th Squad. Mao and the rest didn't know about Pango at first, but when Ji Feng secretly contacted them, they were already prepared, so when Silin talked to them, they didn't show any signs of abnormality. Silin didn't care whose son Pango was, whether he was the future leader of Vanguard, or whether he was the bearer of spell. The only thing he cared about was the 11th Squad. Silin gave the 5 of them 2 choices. One was to leave the 11th Squad and forget about this incident. They would still be members of the same Hunter Corps from now on, but they wouldn't be as close to each other as before. After all, being in the same team was like being a family. The second choice was to stay in the 11th Squad. However, the 11th Squad had its own rules, and they knew this from the moment they joined. Silin was the leader of the 11th Squad, and Silin was the one who made all the decisions. When Silin wasn't around, there was still the vice-captain. They could talk to the captain, the vice-captain, or any other member they trusted. They couldn't skip the 11th Squad and accept orders from someone outside the squad, not even Ji Feng. It wasn't that Silin was being too dictatorial, but the 11th Squad had too many things that no one else had, including some huge secrets. If the 11th Squad didn't work together as a team, they would run into all kinds of trouble in the future. This was also why Silin didn't tell the 5 of them about the 11th Squad's secrets. All 5 of them chose the second option. Pango might not be able to stay in the 11th Squad forever. Ji Feng would definitely transfer him back to the 11th Squad after he successfully fused the 2 genes together. Even if Pango didn't want to, Ji Feng would have to step down sooner or later. Silin understood that Pango had a responsibility he couldn't escape from. However, Pango showed great sincerity. After his time in the 11th Squad, Pango didn't want to join any other squad ever again. The 11th Squad was a very special one, and he was very happy here. He was able to learn a lot of hunter and non-hunter knowledge. Moreover, every member of the 11th Squad was very strong. Even their pets were several sectors ahead of the average hunter. The 5 of them chose to stay, but they were sent back to the probation period. Mogaz was confident that he would be able to regain his teammates' trust. After talking to Pango and the others, Sillin walked out of the room and saw Stanley walking toward him with a very ugly expression on his face. Stanley had contacted the A Squad just now and learned that things weren't going well at the front line. 2 of the higher-ups were dead, and 5 were seriously injured. One of the injured was Bart, whom Sillin was familiar with. Sonba Leruo managed to escape death this time. Of course, he wasn't sure if he was on the assassination list or not. The commander is also injured, so I'm going to head over there right now. As for this matter, we'll talk about it after the war is over, Stanley told Sillin. Sure. However, I hope you can keep your subordinates' mouths shut. There are some things that are better left unsaid. I know that. All right, that device doesn't look like something a navigator could have made. Stanley had a feeling that someone was adding fuel to the fire. At the same time, he tactfully told Sillin to let him know if he discovered anything. Stanley quickly led his men to the front line's central battlefield. He wasn't worried about Pango's safety, and he didn't want to get involved after seeing the 11th Squad's freaks. It was better to talk to the commander about the 11th Squad after the war was over. After Stanley left, Sillin recalled everyone from the 11th Squad, including the spaceplane that Shikai and the others were on. Sillin didn't send any robots to participate in the war this time. First of all, there was a limit to the number of robots that could participate in the war. Some of them were still in the process of upgrading, and it wouldn't do them any good if they were forced to participate in the war. For example, the robots that fought against the navigators were stopped halfway through upgrading, so they weren't as domineering as they were against the Robert family's robots. Secondly, the Vanguard hunters might not want these metal men to join the battle. Unlike the Freedom Army, the hunters had their own way of thinking. They believed that their prey should be hunted by themselves, not to mention that the Vanguard hunters were in an advantageous position right now. A large number of robots joining the fray at a time like this would definitely upset the hunters. Moreover, they didn't trust robots. They were willing to use robots as cannon fodder, but they weren't willing to fight alongside robots. That was why Sillin didn't want to bring trouble to himself. How did my combat room collapse? Carrie roared from the other side of the room. My shooting target is paralyzed too, Tang Qiuqiu said with a cold expression. Thank goodness my indoor orchard wasn't trampled, Sigma said in relief. Sillin clapped his hands to silence everyone. Everyone, clean up your turf after the war and make a list. I'll ask for compensation from the A Squadron when the time comes. Will the A Squadron pay? Xiao Shang wasn't sure. I made an agreement with Stanley when I handed over the management rights, Sillin said. Oh, let's take care of the battlefield first. Get to your positions and prepare the starship for combat. Shimu, I've placed the device in your workshop. Take care of it first. After everything was settled, Sillin walked into his own lounge. The area was well sealed, so it wasn't affected by the war. He turned on his communicator and saw an encrypted message. It was from Kane Wuxia. After reading the message, Sillin informed Cheto, who was currently in control of the starship, that the starship's protective shield would be deactivated for 2 seconds. 2 seconds later, the shield would rise again. 2 seconds after the protective barrier was gone, Wheeze, who was huddled together with Moon and the others at the training ground and discussing about the penalty list, suddenly twitched its ears and looked around. Seeing that Cheto had gestured to it that it was fine, it flicked its ears and went back to work. Not long after, Sillin opened the lounge door and let a person in. Your starship's protective measures are pretty good, I see. The person didn't think of himself as a guest at all. He dragged a chair over, crossed his legs, and started examining Sillin's lounge. You sure aren't polite at all, Sillin said while looking at Kane Wuxia, who was rummaging through the food in his locker. The person sitting in the lounge was none other than the current leader of Wuxia, Kane Wuxia. He didn't look like a leader of an assassin organization at all. Everything about him looked very ordinary. You're asking for trouble. Kane Wuxia took out 2 bags of jerky and a couple of boxes of sweet sauce. You have a lot of good stuff here. Being close to the Food King sure is enviable. Sillin didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the white animal in Kane Wuxia's arms. Until now, he had only communicated with Kane Wuxia through the communicator. Now that he was seeing it with his own eyes, it felt even more different. Is it also a cyborg? Sillin asked as he looked at the little guy in Kane Wuxia's arms. It was using its claws to chew on a piece of jerky dipped in sweet sauce that Kane Wuxia had handed over to it. Yes, it's called ice cream. Its nickname is Lil Bing. It's cute, isn't it? Kane Wuxia was like a parent showing off his child. Ice cream, Lil Bing likes to eat ice cream, so I gave it this name. It likes it very much too. Kane Wuxia patted the head of the little guy in his arms. Ice Cream, who was chewing on the jerky, squinted its eyes. No wonder Uncle Kane always had a box of ice cream to eat every time he saw him. Sillin didn't have any opinion on the name. He was now thinking about how Hui Mao would react if he saw these two guys eating the jerky in Sillin's locker. I heard that Commander Ji Feng is injured. Sillin said. There weren't many people who could injure or even seriously injure Ji Feng. Even if they used other tools, Ji Feng wouldn't let them get away with it easily given his experience. He won't die. Kane Wuxia replied in an indifferent tone. Then he asked, I heard that the 3 assassins Nabila sent to this place are all dead? How did you know? Actually, there should have been 3 more people who came to their aid, but we stopped them. Kane Wuxia didn't answer Sillin's question directly. It made sense. Blue Charm and the others couldn't send a message after Cheto regained control of the starship, so the fog probably had a backup plan. However, it turned out that Wuxia's men were the ones who stopped Sillin. After thinking for a moment, Sillin asked, You know about Pango, don't you? What do you want to know? Did you allow her to steal the incantation and the star map fragment on purpose? The she he was referring to was Pango's mother. Wuxia didn't deny it. I gave it to her because she wanted it. To be honest, I don't really care about that kind of thing. I just wanted to see if she had really decided to betray us. In the end, Pango's mother really did choose to betray them. No matter how strong a person is, they can't fight against the universe. She chose the path she chose, and she must bear the consequences, including death, Kane Wuxia said calmly. Suddenly, little ice cream froze in Kane Wuxia's arms and stopped chewing. She tilted her head and looked at the door. Not long after, the door to the lounge opened, and a cat poked its head inside. Hui Mao, who was happy because of the ticket, immediately exploded when he saw the situation inside the lounge. Sillin covered his face. It looks like we're in trouble. Chapter 394. Put down my jerky. Hui Mao's fur stood on end. Its claws popped out and made a few holes in the floor. Ice Cream squinted at Hui Mao, then took a few bites of the jerky in its claws. It added fuel to the fire. Meow, how dare you be so arrogant in my territory? Sillin pulled Hui Mao back before it could pounce on him. Hui Mao, who was pulled back by Sillin, was still making threatening gestures. It stared at Ice Cream, who was nestled in Wuxia's arms, warily. Wuxia looked at Hui Mao with interest. Sillin wasn't greedy for a Lilo. He was calm, so the cat next to Sillin was definitely not bad. Hui Mao wasn't hostile to Lil Bing and Hua Xiaoheng, but it was on guard. It was only angry because Hua Xiaoheng took its food. Wuxia understood Hua Xiaoheng very well, just like how this little guy would get angry when other people in Wuxia ate Lil Bing's ice cream. If it was just on guard, it was a good sign. I'm sorry, little fat cat, we can actually pay for the food, Wuxia said. Hearing that it would pay, Hui Mao, who was struggling to pounce on it, flicked its ears. It calmed down a little, but its eyes were still vigilant. Will you really pay? Hui Mao asked. Yes. Hui Mao stretched out its claws. Double. Double. Wuxia answered so quickly that Hui Mao's anger subsided a little. However, when it said that it wanted to write a fine, it was mocked by Ice Cream. Damn fatty. Stinky rat, who are you talking about? I hate rats the most. You calm down. You're a guest. Sillin scratched Hui Mao's chin. Hui Mao stared angrily at the two guys who were eating its food. It couldn't help but move its claws. Wuxia chuckled and patted the little guy in its arms. Go play. I have something to talk to Captain Sillin. Ice Cream had an unwilling look on his face as he slowly jumped out of Yin Wuxia's arms and onto the table at the side. Sillin flicked Hui Mao's ears. Take the guest to play. We have something to talk about. Hui Mao's ears moved. Nobody knew what he was thinking. He said to Silin, "Silin, give me my ball." When Hui Mao's ears moved, Silin knew that Hui Mao was bullying again. "Forget it. Let it be." Silin took out Hui Mao's ball and threw it over. Hui Mao bent its forelimbs and caught it nimbly. It hooked its claws and played with the ball. Ice Cream, who was squatting at the side, looked at the ball under Hui Mao's claws. It would be a lie to say that it wasn't envious. Of course, it could see that the ball was special. Hui Mao played with it. Suddenly, it picked up the ball. It jumped and flipped. It used its tail to whip the ball toward Ice Cream. Ice Cream was prepared, but it didn't dodge. Instead, it used its head to hit the ball and bounced it back. The two guys exchanged blows. The ball flew faster and faster. Ordinary people couldn't even follow it with their naked eyes. The two guys moved extremely fast. One moment, they were on the table. The next moment, they flashed to the cabinet. Hui Mao knew that the guy in front of it was a cyborg life form like itself. When it suddenly saw its own kind, it became competitive. In addition, the stinky mouse in front of it had eaten its horde. Therefore, Hui Mao's speed at whipping the ball became faster and faster. It would be best if it could teach the stinky mouse a lesson. Looking at the two guys playing with the ball, Wuxia was in a particularly good mood. The smile on its face deepened. "Silin, when did you get this?" Wuxia asked. "A few years ago." Celine briefly told Wuxia what had happened all those years ago, but he didn't mention anything about the white ball, leaving out some details. "You're so lucky. You can encounter such a good thing while hunting." Wuxia said, "I'm different from you. My family only has 10 years left. When I was at my most difficult time, this little guy helped me. My subordinate, who had been with me for 20 years, betrayed our entire organization for a man from another force. However, this animal was able to pull me back from the brink of death. If it wasn't for Little Ice, perhaps Wuxia's leader would have died." Wuxia didn't explain in detail. Silin guessed that the confrontation between Wuxia and Fog had almost killed Wuxia. There must have been a lot of danger involved. Silin didn't expect Wuxia to value this cyborg life form more than the members of his own organization. A human's lifespan is short. I hope that in the future, when I can't accompany it to eat ice cream anymore, I'll have a companion to talk to. Even if it's a companion to fight, it'll be fine. At least it won't be too lonely. After so many years, in the entire League of Stars, I've only found this fat cat of yours. Compared to strange creatures like Hui Mao and Ice Cream, the lifespan of humans was really too short. Even people with A-level genes and above, who were known to have the longest natural lifespan among humans, couldn't be compared to these creatures. After all, they were also considered robots. No one knew how long their lifespan was. "How old is this cat of yours?" Wuxia asked. "More than 200 years. It said so itself. What about Little Ice?" "I don't know. There are no humans where it lives. It's a planet with a sea-level habitability. There's no advanced civilization. It doesn't know how to calculate time, and it can't speak the language of the League of Stars. Apart from hunting, it hides in its cave all day long. It's obviously very powerful, but it's afraid to see the light. When I was dragged into its cave, I thought I was going to become a chipmunk's food. I didn't expect it to make me safer, because no animal on that planet dares to enter its cave." When Wuxia was talking about these things, his eyes were gentle, as if he was talking about his precious child. Outsiders probably wouldn't expect the dignified boss of Wuxia to have such a side to him. Compared to Hui Mao, Ice Cream was indeed low-key, like a mouse that couldn't see the light. But what about Hui Mao? Silin remembered that when this guy was a weak kitten, he had swallowed a few wolves while lying there. Looking at this guy's usual style, he knew that this fatty had always been arrogant. Although Wuxia had said all this, Silin didn't think that this uncle had come all the way here just to talk about ice cream. As expected, after Wuxia talked about ice cream a little more, he said, "When I was searching for cyborgs, I had also focused my attention on some of the secret research labs of the League of Stars. There are a lot of research labs in the League of Stars that researched cyborgs, but the results were not satisfactory at all. They were all failures." Did you send someone to the research base at Sector C to steal experimental information as well? That's right. One of the labs was researching the fusion of machine and organic life. I thought they would create something new since they were so secretive, but it's just trash. Wuxia's expression was calm, but his words were filled with mockery and disdain. I've learned some inside stories while I was collecting information over the years. For example, the most influential company in the League of Stars, Miracle Corporation. I know who's supporting them, including the shady deals they've made in the dark. There was one time that group of people came to capture Lil Bing with Nabila. In a fit of anger, I carried out an assassination attempt. Who are those people? The old fellows of the Yu family. However, if Azrael's men hadn't interfered, I would have succeeded. Oh, by the way, you and the little princess of the Yu family, Yu Linglong, are you? Did you know that Yu Linglong's legs were broken for a period of time? She was injured by us during that assassination attempt. Silin frowned. He remembered that Yu Linglong had been in a wheelchair for a period of time. It was when Sector Z was opened, and Silin had sensed the presence of Azrael's men at the time. Azrael's men and the Yu family had a deal. I don't know what the deal was, but they are definitely connected. This time, Navigator has a device that can seal off the starship's AI system, right? That's the result of Azrael's research. There was too much information in Wuxia's words. Navigator's men had Azrael's help? Or was it the Yu family who was adding fuel to the fire? There's one more thing I need to tell you. You must not know that the little princess of the Yu family once had designs on the cat beside you, right? You may have protected the cat well in the past, but some people still recognized the cat's uniqueness. However, when they decided to take action in the end, they still targeted me and Lil Bing, who had been staying with me all this time. Politicians are all born actors. Silin had been silent all this time in response to Wuxia's words. The Yu family aside, Wuxia had known about Hui Mao since a long time ago, but he had only revealed himself now. It would appear that Wuxia had been observing Silin and Hui Mao all this time. If Silin and Hui Mao's performance was unreliable to Wuxia, then this conversation probably wouldn't have taken place. A long while later, Silin asked, So let's work together. I won't interfere with your business, and you shouldn't interfere with Wuxia's business either. Private matters are private matters, and we'll work together when there's a need to work together. What do you think? Azrael and Fog both have partners, so I think Wuxia is looking for a partner as well. Who are you going to work with, Vanguard or the 11th Squad? Silin looked at Wuxia. The 11th Squad, of course. I don't get along with Vanguard. You know that. After some thought, Silin extended his hand and smiled. It's a pleasure working with you. Pleasure working with you. Wuxia extended his hand and high-fived Silin. They didn't sign any agreement. To them, a so-called agreement wasn't essential. If they wanted to betray each other, a mere agreement wouldn't be able to stop them. While Silin and Wuxia were conversing, the two fellows who were originally competing with each other in a ball game were now hugging each other and fighting fiercely. They kicked, clawed, and even bit each other. The tables and chairs beside them were now in pieces. It wasn't clear if they were scratched or bitten. Hee, such a good relationship. Wuxia laughed. Silin was speechless. Both of them had bitten off a few pieces of fur. Was this a sign of a good relationship? Which kid hasn't been through a fight? Wuxia didn't seem to mind. The one you have, it's a female? Silin asked. I think so. I think so? And I think so? They've lived together for more than 10 years? You don't even know the gender of your own kid? Wuxia looked at the communicator in his hand and saw an encrypted message. The fight is almost over. It was a pleasant conversation. Wuxia called out to Lil Bing. Ice Cream, who was fighting with Hui Mao, kicked Hui Mao away and jumped back into Wuxia's arms. Meow, I'll beat you into a dried fish next time. Wee spat out the white fur in its mouth and pointed its paw at the direction of the sound with a threatening tone. Ice Cream, who was nestled in Wuxia's arms, snorted and started licking his fur. Both of them had bald spots all over their bodies, but the wounds quickly healed and new fur grew on them. For creatures like them, This level of injury was a piece of cake. Wuxia left the starship with ice cream. No one except Silin, Huimao and Cheto knew that ice cream had been here. Not even Sigma and Moon knew about it. Huimao buried his head in a storage cabinet and counted his belongings. Meow, they didn't pay. Stinky rats, don't let me see them again, or I'll beat them to death. Silin shook his head and walked to the side to pick up the forgotten leather ball. He didn't want the cat to lose it. Just like Wuxia said, the battle was coming to an end very soon. Both sides had called for a ceasefire because it would only benefit the others if they kept fighting. The navigators had suffered more losses this time, so they were the first to retreat. Vanguard's people stayed behind to deal with the aftermath. Ji Feng was lying inside a healing pod on one of the A Squad starships. He was covered in multiple wounds, and his condition was fairly serious. The healing pod was connected to his body with all kinds of tubes. It was a scary sight. However, Ji Feng was still conscious. Beside the healing pod, Stanley and a few other high-ranking members of the A clan stood there and reported the situation to Ji Feng. Ji Feng listened with his eyes closed. When Stanley told him about the 11th squad, he opened his eyes. Let Pango stay there if he wants to. I'm not that easy to kill. As for the 11th squad, don't worry about them. Let Silin think what he's doing. But don't you think the 11th squad is too unstable, Commander? Someone asked. As long as we don't force him, Silin won't harm Vanguard. He's a member of Vanguard after all. Moreover, the 11th squad has something the other squads and even the 4 great hunter regiments don't have. They have extremely valuable technical talents there. The hunter regiments had never placed much importance on technical talents. Even Communidin, who researched parasites and wrote the parasitic code, would not have made much of an impact without Nada's help. He might not even have been able to preserve the parasitic code. The technological development of the hunter regiments was limited. The 4 great hunter regiments didn't have much in the way of independent development. Most of them relied on trading and purchasing to acquire new technology. However, this wasn't the case for the 11th team. In this battle, the armor worn by the members of the 11th team, the fighter jets piloted by the members of the 11th team, and the members of the 11th team who were usually extremely low-key but had extraordinary abilities all left a deep impression on the A-team. Ji Feng wasn't offended by Stanley's request for compensation. Instead, he smiled. That's Silin's style. Give him as much as he wants. How do we treat the 11th squad from now on? Stanley asked. We'll treat them the same way. We don't have to do anything on purpose. Besides, they don't care what others think of them. Silin, I underestimated him. Ji Feng closed his eyes again. He admitted that he had underestimated Silin. He wasn't the only one. Ji Feng believed that Azrael and the other organizations had underestimated Silin as well. No one knew what Silin was capable of, but a person like him had kept a low profile throughout the chaos of the League of Stars. What was Silin trying to do? According to the information he had, Ji Feng had always been suspicious of Silin's motives. He couldn't figure out what Silin was thinking. Silin only cared about a small number of people in Vanguard. He didn't care about the entire Vanguard. Ji Feng knew this, so he wasn't afraid of Silin seizing power. However, he had a feeling that Silin was someone with an ulterior motive. It was just that he couldn't figure out what the kid was trying to do. Captain, the bodies of the 3 killers from Fog have been sent over by the 11th squad, Stanley said. Ji Feng moved his fingers. I don't need to tell you how to deal with them. You guys do it. The 3 killers from Fog were to be used as a memorial to the dead members and the top executives who had been assassinated in this incident. Captain, is Silin really that powerful? Someone next to Stanley asked. Ji Feng didn't answer. Instead, he asked Stanley to release a projection. On the screen was Lan Mei's corpse, including the long gash on her body that had almost split her body into 2 halves. From the wound on her body and the 3 hands that were cut off, she didn't even have time to react when she was hit. That is to say, Silin's attack was extremely fast and ruthless enough to kill her in one strike. How fast was it that Lan Mei didn't even have time to react? The few people standing next to the healing pod unconsciously looked at Ji Feng. They wondered how he would fare compared to their captain. "Have you figured out the cause of Roten's death?" Ji Feng asked. Stanley shook his head. "Not yet. The 11th squad doesn't reveal anything." "Then forget it." Ji Feng waved his finger, indicating that there was no need to continue the research. "Captain." A man came in. It was Suali, one of Ji Feng's subordinates. Ji Feng gestured for Stanley and the others to leave. After they left, Suali took out a secret message that he had just received. "Lon Hudi? What's up with that guy? Shouldn't he be busy fighting with Heaven's Birth?" Although puzzled, Gale still gave a series of passwords after Suali left. Then, a projector at the side projected an image. The image was of Blue Butterfly's current leader, the person with the codename Blue Butterfly. "How is it? Can you still live?" the person in the video teased. "Cut the crap. What's up?" "Yes, let's work together." Chapter 395. Ji Feng didn't seem surprised at Lon Hudi's suggestion to work together. "You can't handle him on your side?" "Not really." Lon Hudi put his hands on the table, crossed his fingers, and smiled. "As long as I have enough time, I can finish them all, including Bloomer." Bloomer, Lon Hudi, Ji Feng, and Tamer of the Navigator were all star-ranked hunters. These four were known as the Four Giants in the world of hunters, because they were the leaders of the Hunter Corps. The Four Giants were the symbols of the entire League of Stars. The Four Giants had been in this situation for a long time, but now, Lon Hudi actually said that as long as he had enough time, he could finish off Bloomer. "It seems you have made a good plan," Ji Feng said. No emotion could be heard from his voice. "That's because no one else is paying attention to me. But you are in trouble. The three most difficult powers to deal with in the League of Stars have all interfered in your battle against the Navigator. You are lucky that you can still speak," Lon Hudi said. The three most difficult powers that Lon Hudi mentioned were Azrael, Fog, and Wuxia. Anyone who got involved with one of them would have a headache, much less all three at the same time. But this time, what Lon Hudi didn't know was that Wuxia wasn't interfering for the Vanguard, but for Sillin. It could be said that the Vanguard had received some help from Wuxia because of Sillin. Otherwise, the Vanguard would have lost a few more high-level members. Even if they were prepared, Azrael and Fog interfered at the same time, Ji Feng would be in trouble. If it was just the Navigator's people, Ji Feng wouldn't have ended up in such a terrible situation. "Nabila personally intervened this time?" Lon Hudi asked. Ji Feng didn't say anything. Nabila and Tamer attacked at the same time. Ji Feng was indeed in a terrible situation. If it wasn't for Wuxia stopping Nabila, the battle wouldn't have ended so quickly. Ji Feng did not answer, and Lon Hudi did not care. His main purpose this time was not this. "Let's cooperate," Lon Hudi said. "Reason." The League of Stars logo hunter group doesn't need four. Ji Feng looked at Lon Hudi. He did not expect Lon Hudi to have such an idea. "Which one should I cut?" There was no need for 4 hunter groups in the League of Stars, but there definitely couldn't be only 2. That way, there wouldn't be peace. In that case, only one of them could be cut off. Heaven's Birth. As for the reason, I thought you should know. Ji Feng knew exactly why Lon Hudi had made such a choice. Heaven's Birth was merely working with a few scattered assassin organizations, and behind the Navigators were the people from the 3 sectors of the League of Stars. The weapons and technology used by the Navigators this time were not something they could get their hands on. Some of them were newly developed by the military. Although there were not many of them, Ji Feng knew that they were from the 3 sectors of the upper 3 sectors. Although the conflict between the Navigators and the Vanguard this time was huge, there was no guarantee that the weapons and troops in their hands would be even stronger next time. It was even possible that the Navigators had changed internally. There were too many unfamiliar faces among the senior Navigators who went to negotiate this time. Ji Feng already had a premonition. The Navigators were no longer the Navigators of the past. The Hunters there were no longer pure hunters, but hounds. Those people want to attack the hunter group through the hunter group? Ji Feng lowered his eyelids, thought for a moment, and snorted. "All right, let's cut off Heaven's birth first. While Ji Feng and Lan Hudi were plotting to turn the Big Four into the Big Three, Silin also had a secret communication device in the starship. Long time no see, Silin. On the communication screen, it was still that familiar face, that familiar girl with an innocent, cute, and playful smile. Long time no see, Linglong. Silin was in his own lounge, not letting Hui Mao in. There were some things he didn't want others to know, including Hui Mao. If Hui Mao knew something, he would probably make a fuss again. How are you guys this time? Did the 11th Squad suffer a lot of losses in the war? How are the members? From Yu Linglong's question, Silin could tell that she was very clear about the situation here. Not bad. There were some losses, but there were no casualties. That's good. Yu Linglong smiled sweetly on the screen. Wuxia, talk to me. Yu Linglong's smile faded at Silin's words. Is that so? What did you find out? I found out a few things, like why you were in a wheelchair back then. Then he must have told you about how he almost captured your cat. Yu Linglong twirled her hair with her fingers. Do you believe him? I do. But I also believe that there's more to it than meets the eye. Yu Linglong retracted her smile and said seriously, it's true that I told my grandfather about the cat beside you, but I know that if he had to choose between you and Wuxia, he would definitely choose Wuxia. This is also the reason why I contacted you this time. Silin didn't say anything and signaled Yu Linglong to continue. Seeing that Silin wasn't impatient, Yu Linglong continued, you know that for families like ours, we usually choose a core member to nurture. In my generation, there are 3 candidates. In fact, there were originally 5, but the other 2 have been eliminated. Being eliminated meant either death or crippling. Among the 3 candidates now, 1 is me, and the other 2 are my eldest cousin brother and second cousin brother. The competition between the 3 of us has always been very intense, and after that incident, I knew that Nabila and my eldest cousin brother had cooperated. I knew that he would definitely choose to hide and not to lay his hands on you. Een Unpardonable protected the cyborg very well. Because of this, Nabila wanted to use this to attack him even more, as Een Unpardonable did not pay much attention to other things at all. Those who joined Wuxia for a short period of time, such as Judy, and those who joined for a long time but didn't get Wuxia's full trust, didn't know the secret of that cyborg. They didn't know that Wuxia had a cyborg that was known as a miracle creature by his side. They just thought that it was a precious pet that could talk and had a high IQ. Later, Wuxia took revenge on the Yu family because of this matter. My father and second cousin brother almost lost their lives. I lost both of my legs and had to recuperate for a long time. This was the result of the intervention of Azrael, and Nabila didn't help at all. Nyebella wanted to use Een Wuxia to kill us, causing the Yu family and Een Wuxia to become enemies. However, his plan didn't succeed, and after that incident, my eldest cousin lost the support of a portion of the family. Even my grandfather had a bad opinion of my eldest cousin. Later, Wuxia said that no one is allowed to have any ideas about the cyborg in his possession, and no one is allowed to have any ideas about the cat in your possession. After that, my eldest brother wanted to attack your cat again. Back then, I wanted to notify you, but I couldn't contact you at all. It was as if you had disappeared. At the time, Silin had taken Hui Mao to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire and avoided a crisis. By the time he returned, the League of Stars was in chaos, and everyone was too busy to pay attention to Silin. Silin guessed that the reason he and Hui Mao were able to go so smoothly was because Wuxia had secretly helped him fend off a lot of dangers. Silin was very grateful for this. Whether or not Wuxia did it for little ice cream and wheeze, it was still a favor. As for the matter with Instructor Mo Heng, I apologize. I had no choice. If I didn't act, my second cousin brother would have, and if he did, Instructor Mo Heng would have suffered a lot. Silin fell silent for a moment before asking, "What are you doing this time?" On the screen, Yu Linglong stared at Silin for a while. She still couldn't understand Silin. It was the same back then and it was the same now. Sighing, Yu Linglong said, "Right now, my strongest competitor in the Yu family is my second cousin brother. This time, he sent someone to assassinate someone, and my people can't protect him in time. Therefore, I hope that you can help me find that person and protect him until reinforcements arrive. This man may have stepped down from his position, but his influence still remains. If I can get his help, the support I will receive at Sector A will be much greater." When she said this, Yu Linglong's aura changed completely. She was no longer the mischievous and lively girl she used to be. Right now, Yu Linglong exuded a sense of competence and coldness. This was the real little princess of the Yu family, and perhaps the empress who would control the entire Yu family in the future. Sillin looked at Yu Linglong in this state. He felt a little unfamiliar, but he wasn't surprised. Besides, the fact that Yu Linglong could say all this meant that she trusted him enough. "Who is it?" Sillin asked. "Former Senator Sam Burt." Yu Linglong told Sillin about Sambert's information. This was equivalent to a trade between an employer and a hunter. Their friendship was nothing more than a weight of trust. "All right, I'll contact you when the time comes. Don't worry, the number of people who know about this is limited. There won't be more than 3 in our team." Sillin read the information once and deleted it in front of Yu Linglong. "Sillin, thank you," Yu Linglong said after a moment of silence. "No need, you've helped me a lot in the past." "Sillin, do you know? When I first saw you at 7 Luminaries, I had a feeling that if I had this person by my side to help me, it was only a matter of time before I took control of the Yu family, or even the entire League of Stars. I'm sorry, I just want to be a hunter," Sillin said with a smile. "That's true. You, Sillin, don't like to be restricted." Yu Linglong also smiled and softened the cold expression on her face. "Be careful, the Yu family assassins may not be as strong as Mist or Wuxia, but they're definitely not weak." Sillin made a "got it" gesture and ended the call. The lounge was quiet. Sillin lay on the chair and thought back to what Yu Linglong had said. Sillin believed Yu Linglong's explanation. Back then, Yu Linglong and others had helped him a lot, such as Wuxia who helped him in secret, and Gaydar who had never shown up again. Sillin knew why Wuxia helped him, but why Gaydar? Rubbing his forehead, Sillin decided not to think too much about it. He was going with his intuition. Sillin knew of the Sambo Yu Linglong spoke of. He had met him once before. Sambert was the old man Hua she wanted to protect at Sector M back then. That old man was an important person. If even Yu Linglong paid so much attention to him, it was obvious that the old man's influence wasn't low. When he thought about the star map coordinates Yu Linglong gave him, Sillin smiled. What a coincidence! Sambert's spaceplane was attacked by Yu Linglong's second cousin brother's men. In order to avoid being intercepted, they fled to Sector X, Planet X, C-362, Sillin's birthplace, planet Brown Earth. It was time to go back and take a look. Sillin got up and walked out of the lounge. The first thing he saw was Hui Mao running towards him with cat-like steps. The guy looked to be in a pretty good mood. "You're finally out, Sillin," Hui Mao shouted from afar. Then he jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and said, "The A Squadron has allocated funds. Only more, no less." Sillin had also guessed that it would be like this. There really were only a few things that could make this cat happy. So, Sillin wrenched the gray cat off his shoulder. There were still some food crumbs stuck to its claws. It probably hadn't even had the time to lick them when it heard that the A Squadron was going to allocate funds for its repairs. It was so happy that it forgot everything and ran straight over. Also, most of the repairs on the starship are done, and we've got an extra sum of money. What do you think we should buy? The gray cat walked in front of Sillin and raised its tail. The tip of its tail was even curled into an arc as it muttered to itself. Sillin didn't interrupt it. He let it ramble on for a while, or it wouldn't be able to hold itself back. When he arrived at the command room, Sillin called Cheto over and told him about the new operation. Just like before, Sillin only planned to bring Cheto and Wheeze with him when he went to find Sambot. Everyone else should stay in the team for now. It was only after Hui Mao was done nagging that it noticed Sillin and Cheto were discussing something else. Another mission? Hui Mao pulled its ears to the sides in obvious displeasure. It was going to sleep for a while, and since there was a mission, it meant that it couldn't sleep anymore. However, where are we going this time? Hui Mao asked. If they were going to a free trade zone, It could buy some high-grade cat food and try it as a pastime. In the end, to Hui Mao's disappointment, Silin was going to the poor Sector X in Hui Mao's eyes. Sector X Hui Mao and Silin had been there before, and there really wasn't much fun there. Moreover, after the League of Stars' chaos, the tourist planets were in a half-closed state, and many of the supply chains were broken. They would definitely be bored to death if they went there. Although we're only going to Sector X this time, the mission isn't simple, Silin said. Hui Mao's ears moved, but he didn't say anything. We'll probably run into a lot of killers, Silin said again. Hui Mao's ears perked up. It's not going to be easy, Silin concluded. Hui Mao scratched its ears with its paw. In other words, the reward is a lot? That's right. Then let's go. When do we depart? We shook its fur. It was in high spirits, you know. At the side, Cheto. This cat deserved to be tricked by Silin back then. Chapter 396. Silin didn't stay for the post-battle meeting. Ji Feng was busy with his healing, so he couldn't attend to the post-battle meeting for now. Therefore, Silin left with Cheto and Hui Mao after informing Stanley that he was going to leave. Stanley didn't bother with Silin either. Ji Feng had said that Silin could do whatever he wanted, so there was no need for him to interfere. Moreover, Stanley was actually very wary of Silin after this incident. Now that Silin was gone, he didn't have to face him anymore. He let out a sigh of relief. Yudi took Silin's place to participate in the post-battle summary meeting. Right now, the 11th Squad was under Yudi's command. Shi Kai and Shimu were busy upgrading their robots. Last time, they were halfway through the upgrade, but they hadn't finished yet. This time, they received some new data and information. Both Shi Kai and Shimu were busy upgrading their robots. Their data and information were all derived from actual combat. The data they obtained from this battle was very meaningful, and it was a good opportunity for them to upgrade their robots once more. After the meeting, Yudi and the rest of the 11th Squad returned to the base to rest and reorganize. Their armor needed some repairs, and Carrie's group needed time to get used to each other. Not only did they need to repair the hardware, but they also needed a heart-to-heart talk with each other. Everyone was tired after the battle, so it was time for a good rest. Hey, don't you think our captain needs to rest? Xiao Shang leaned on the railing and said lazily to Carrie, who was busy repairing the fighter in the workshop below. How would I know? Our captain is a busy man, but we don't need to worry about that. We just need to improve ourselves. Carrie knew very well why Silin had only brought Cheto and Wheeze with him. One reason was because of the secrecy of their mission, and the other reason was because of the level of danger. Although they were above average compared to other hunters, they were nothing compared to Silin and Cheto. He circled around the starship once before sitting down at a corner. No one knew what he was thinking. Hey, you, why are you daydreaming again? Behind him, Zoel and Sigma flew over as well. The four of them had been working together all this time. The light on Ayu's face flickered, and he said in a deep voice, I'm thinking about life. All right, keep thinking, but don't overdo it. The starship system is still in the process of upgrading. Be careful not to ruin Little 11. You know, when we think too seriously, it will affect the surrounding machinery, Rufia said, his tone clearly rising. Zoel said coldly, don't say that with a smug tone. There's nothing to be proud of. Rufia, who was feeling pleased with himself, was choked by Zol's cold water. While the 11th Squad was busy with their own business, Silin, Cheto, and Hui Mao were secretly traveling to Sector X. Sector X hadn't changed much. If anything, it would be that the sector had returned to its former bleak state. There was a time when the tourism planets in Sector X were mined, and it had boosted the population and economy of the sector. Many people's lives had changed because of the tourism planets. Their labor force was cheap, but at least they finally found a way to sell it cheaply. Unlike the beginning when they couldn't even sell their cheap labor force. When Silin brought Hui Mao and Tang Qiuqiu here, Sector X was at its busiest in the last few decades. However, the liveliness didn't last long before the League of Stars' war began. After the Fenier's family's little garden and other tourism planets were half closed, Sector X returned to its former bleak state. Of course, this bleak state was only relative to a trade sector. The people living in Saturn's sector were used to this bleak state since a long time ago. To them, it wasn't much of a change. Sillin looked at the coded message he just received on his communicator and had Cheto drive the spaceplane into the planet. Sillin was all too familiar with planet Brown Earth. He didn't even need to look at the satellite map to know which places were suitable for landing. The satellite array outside the planet was still the same as before. However, Sillin was no longer afraid of these sky eyes that the people on the planet feared. He didn't need to do anything himself. Be it Hui Mao or Cheto, they could easily take care of these sky eyes and avoid their surveillance. Compared to some of the more complicated surveillance equipment he had experienced before, planet Brown Earth sky eyes looked too ordinary. After avoiding all kinds of surveillance, their small spaceplane landed in a remote and barren area. There was a forest here, and the growth of the trees wasn't good. Due to the environment, it was impossible for them to grow densely. However, for Sillin, this didn't affect their spaceplane's landing and concealment. After leaving the spaceplane, it turned invisible on its own. Very few people came to this area, and even if they did, they might not be able to discover the spaceplane parked here. Where are we going first? Crouching on Sillin's shoulder, Hui Mao moved his claws. He was getting bored again, and his claws were itchy if he didn't find something to do. Sillin looked at his communicator. Right now, Yu Linglong only knew that Sambot was on this planet, but she didn't know his specific location. Unless Sambot contacted Sillin of his own accord, or Sillin found Sambot directly. The strange thing was that if Sambot's situation was really bad, he should have accepted Yu Linglong's good intentions and contacted Sillin. But he didn't, which meant that Sambot's situation wasn't too bad. Moreover, Sambot was guarded against Yu Linglong, so he had no intention of accepting Yu Linglong's good intentions for now. It seemed that Sambot really was very dissatisfied and distrustful of the Yu family. Never mind, let's wait for a while. Sillin looked around and said, I'm going back to take a look. You mean that rundown town? Hui Mao had a pretty deep impression of that place. He felt that Sillin's birthplace wasn't as good as his. Yes, that's the place. Hui Mao's ears drooped. Although he didn't say anything, his reaction alone was enough to tell how unwilling he was. He was only enduring it for Sillin's sake. Sillin smiled and patted Hui Mao's head. There might be some changes this time. What changes? I don't even have a place to live, muttered Hui Mao. Have you forgotten? When I came here a few years ago, I bought an abandoned housing area and had people renovate it. Hui Mao's ears perked up the moment Sillin mentioned this. He remembered that the secret purchase was made with his help and tampered with some system data. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to take down the area without Sillin's help. Hui Mao snorted twice when he thought of that. Then let's go. It's free to live in my own place anyway. Cheto. Is he implying that I'm going to buy cat food with the money I'm saving? Actually, Hui Mao wasn't just trying to save money. He knew that there was a territory that belonged to him that he hadn't marked or patrolled yet. Other than the prosperous city and civilian district, there was also a desolate area bordered by the peaceful civilian district. Sillin and the others had landed in this desolate area. They walked straight ahead, and it didn't take long before they saw the poor houses at the edge. No one noticed that Sillin and the others were a lot less populated than before. Some of the houses had collapsed, and it looked like no one had lived in them for a long time. However, in the direction of the city, there were some newly built houses. Some of the people who sold their labor at a low price had saved enough money to build a new house here. This place was close to the city, which gave them a sense of superiority. They felt that they were superior compared to the people in the center of the civilian area. The abandoned houses Sillin bought were located at the center of the civilian district. According to Sillin's design, the builders had built the place very well. After demolishing the abandoned houses, they built a big courtyard that looked similar to the one in the wilderness. The only difference was that this courtyard wasn't decorated with any fancy decorations, and the colors were a little dull. The two-story building in the courtyard wasn't very eye-catching even on a satellite map. All of this was done with Sillin's own money. He didn't use the 11th Squad's funds or Hui Mao's cat food money. Silin had earned all of it by hunting and completing missions himself. Moreover, the cost of living here wasn't high to begin with, and this was the civilian district. It didn't cost much to build the place. The population here was even smaller than before. Most of the people who participated in the development of the tourist planet had migrated, and some of them had disappeared without a trace. No one knew if they were still alive or not. The rest of them squeezed into the city as much as they could, and those who couldn't fit into the city set up camp near the city. Compared to what he saw the last time he came here, there were many more abandoned houses. Hui Mao had already jumped into the courtyard when Silin walked over. The protective walls of the courtyard were nothing to Hui Mao, and he didn't even need a key card to enter. Even though Hui Mao didn't like the conditions here, it was still his territory. After rubbing his scent and making some markings, Hui Mao jumped back onto Silin's shoulder and pointed at the abandoned houses around them. Silin, let's buy all of these too. Let's build a bigger courtyard. I'm going to buy all of these. Silin didn't enter the courtyard to take a closer look. Instead, he walked in another direction. There was a small shop there. It was the tavern that Silin rented out. The tavern's business wasn't good. One could tell from the counter that very few people came here. Laughter came from inside the tavern. It came from both adults and children. When Silin walked into the tavern, the welcome screen at the entrance didn't light up. It had been stopped, and there was no need to waste electricity when it was so popular. Welcome, what can I do for you? A middle-aged man with green stubble walked out of the tavern. His face looked a little weathered, but he was in good spirits. There was a smile in his eyes, but when he saw Silin, he froze for a moment and forgot what he was going to say. Long time no see, 20%. Silin greeted him with a smile before sitting down next to a round wooden table. Cheto sat down at another table and didn't disturb Silin and 20%'s conversation. Hui Mao was about to jump onto the counter and walk around when Cheto pulled him away. Silin had rented out this tavern to 20% the first time he left. The last time he came here, the tavern's business wasn't this bad, and 20%'s life wasn't bad either. But obviously it wasn't the same anymore. The counter was very clean, and it was obvious that the owner cleaned it every day. The wine bottles were also very clean, but some unnoticed dust at the corner exposed the truth. It's pretty hard right now, isn't it? Silin said. Silin, is it really you? 20% finally came to himself and found it a little hard to believe. After all, it had been years since Silin left. Although he rented out the tavern, Silin had never asked about the tavern's situation, be it when it was profitable or when it was in dire straits these past 2 years. After Silin nodded in confirmation, 20% chuckled, "You don't look like you've changed much." 20% wasn't much older than Silin, but now that the two of them were standing side by side, people would believe them if they said they were father and son. The difference in lifespan caused by the environment they grew up in and their genetic rank made up for this difference. Silin chatted with 20% about the changes that had happened here in the past few years. Now, 20% was married and had a child, living the same life as his parents. 20%'s wife came out to entertain Silin and the rest. She was a typical woman from the commoner district, but it was obvious that she treated 20% very well, and her smile was very sincere. Her son held a rag in his hand and ran behind his mother with his short legs. "Do you want to go live in the city?" Silin asked. "No, I'm not suitable." 20%, who already had a lot of deep wrinkles, scratched his head in embarrassment. "I still think I'm more suitable here. I'm not used to living in the city. Come, Kong, call Uncle Silin." 20% carried his son over. Silin and 20% were of the same generation, so the child naturally should call Silin uncle. "Hello, Uncle Silin." The child looked at Silin and greeted. Actually, he felt that he should call Silin big brother. The person in front of him looked so much younger than his father. However, he was more curious about the fat cat that was yawning on the table next to him. His eyes darted over. "So fat. This is for you." Silin took out the things that he had prepared from his bag. It was some snacks that he bought when he was buying cat food. Sometimes Hui Mao would use these to grind his teeth. Silin's 20% was embarrassed. Although he had never seen it before, He could tell that these things were very expensive. Moreover, they were all food that could not be bought in the surrounding area. The food did not attract much jealousy. The security in this area was not that good either. It's okay. These are gifts for the little guy. Sillin pushed the things on the table towards Kong and rubbed his head. Thank you, Uncle Sillin. Kong no longer paid attention to Huimao. After 20% agreed, the little guy sat obediently at the side with a pile of food. Huimao glared at the child who opened the packaging and started munching on the food. That's what I use to grind my teeth when I'm bored. Seeing the fat cat on the table next to him waiting for him with its round eyes, Kong picked up a biscuit and handed it over. Here, kitty. Huimao turned his head away. Not eating. I'm angry. Don't worry about it, Kong. Eat it yourself. It has its own cat food, said Sillin. 20%'s wife brought over a box of wine and a plate of snacks. She placed them on the table where Sillin and 20% were sitting. Thank you, sister-in-law. Sillin took a bottle of wine. It was the taste of the old town. It was cheap, but it had enough flavor. It reminded Sillin of the days when he worked here. Cheto did not refuse the wine in front of him. Instead, he picked it up and took 2 sips. Huimao's eyes widened even more. Why is a robot drinking wine? It didn't take long for Huimao to notice some barely noticeable water vapor rising from Cheto's body. Oh, sister-in-law, do you have tissues? Asked Sillin. Yes, please wait a moment. 20%'s wife smiled apologetically. Then she walked to the back room and passed some tissues to Sillin. Enjoy your meal. I'll go prepare some side dishes. 20%'s wife left after saying that. She called Kong along so that he wouldn't interrupt their conversation. She knew that Sillin was the owner of this tavern, and that Sillin was the one who gave 20% a better foothold. But was he here to take back the tavern? After Second Cheng's wife and little Kong had left, Sillin gulped down a mouthful of wine and said to Second Cheng, You and little Kong can increase your gene rank through genetic transformation. This way, your lifespan will naturally be a little longer. You have the highest success rate. Kong is slightly worse, but his success rate is still around 70 to 80%. 20% put down the bottle and asked, Where's the kid's mother? She's a little special. I'm afraid her success rate is only 10% at most. Sillin had already analyzed Kang's DNA when he was rubbing his son's head. When he took the tissue, Sillin touched 20%'s wife's finger and analyzed her DNA as well. There were some things that even the most advanced medical technology couldn't change. Genya once said that it was called fate. Then forget it. 20% smiled. Thank you, Sillin. 20% knew that Sillin thinks that Sillin is helping him, but he didn't force the issue. Sillin took out a bottle and a box of liquid medicine. This is for 5 people. You can try it if you change your mind. What Celine took out was a potion he had synthesized himself. It was milder and had fewer side effects. It was suitable for people with low geno ranks. No one in a hunter regiment would use this potion because their average geno rank was above B rank. 20%'s hands trembled as he looked at the bottle and medicine on the table. This was something they didn't even dare to think about. Sillin took out another card. The rent from 20%'s deal had always been on this carry card. I'll leave this pub to you, Sillin said. I've already done the paperwork. Actually, the paperwork was done directly by hacking into the system. It only saved the manual verification process. No one would be able to find out, and no one would. Old David took the opportunity to emigrate. No one knew where he went. On this planet, 20% was the only person that Sillin knew. After leaving the pub, Sillin went to Genya's former residence. The lush and leafy Fuji tree in the courtyard looked a little sickly right now. The last time Sillin came over, it hadn't grown much, and now it looked even sicker than before. Sure enough, without the people from the Gen family, the Fuji tree couldn't grow. Sillin touched the cracked bark on the Fuji tree and said, Hold on a little longer. I'll take you to the Gen family. Sillin was standing quietly in the yard and reminiscing. Squatting on the broken, almost rotten wooden rocking chair under the Fuji tree, Huimao's eyes narrowed. Suddenly, his ears twitched and he looked toward a certain direction in the yard. At the same time, Silin and Cheto also looked in that direction. In the next moment, a figure nimbly jumped over the wall, avoided the protective equipment on the wall, and landed steadily on the ground. It was a very arrogant landing posture. Then, the bearded man who was dressed like a normal civilian in this area was stunned when he looked up. It was obvious from his expression that he didn't notice that there was someone in the yard, and there wasn't just one. Even the fat cat sitting on the rotten wood was looking at him. His face twitched as he landed in an arrogant posture. However, the sense of vigilance he had when he found out that there was someone in the yard was greatly reduced when he saw the person in the yard and the fat cat who was looking at him as if it had seen something fun. Cough, hee, I've entered the wrong yard. Goodbye. A rough male voice rang before he turned around and prepared to slip away. Where are you going, Hoosie? Silin's leisurely voice rang. The man who was about to jump over the wall almost twisted his waist. He turned around and looked at Silin helplessly. You can recognize me like this? Hui Mao yawned again, narrowed his eyes and continued to sleep. He wasn't an enemy, so he couldn't fight. Boring. What are you doing here? Sector X and Sector S are pretty far from each other. Silin said. The bearded man in front of him who looked like the most common civilian in the ghetto was the disciple of the current leader of Fire Phoenix, one of the three great forces of sectors, Pianhua. You're always dressed like a man every time I run into you. Do you have transvestism? Silin said. Nonsense, this is called concealment. Do you know? Pianhua did not elaborate. Silin had a feeling that there should be more to this than meets the eye. However, Pianhua was unwilling to talk about it, so Silin did not pursue the matter any further. He said, What are you doing here? Climbing over the wall? What about trespassing? Pianhua stopped pretending now and walked over with a swing of his arms. Nothing, I just saw that no one has been living here for a long time, so I was curious. Hui Mao's nose twitched. Don't you have a place to stay? You need to pay to stay here, and there are so many of you. Everyone has to pay their own rent. Pianhua's eyes flashed, and then he chuckled. No, it's just me. But Silin, what are you guys doing here? This is my birthplace. This yard belongs to my master. Silin said. So that's how it is? You were born here? Pianhua was flabbergasted. Although he did not know much about Silin, he knew that Silin was a powerful person. He could not imagine that Silin was born in such a small and broken place, and in the slums at that. So, you're just here to reminisce? Pianhua asked. Silin looked at Pianhua. What do you want to say? Nothing. Pianhua was a little hesitant. Sangbote. Silin said softly. Hearing Silin's words, Pianhua suddenly raised his head. Seeing the expression in Silin's eyes, Pianhua did not plan to hide it anymore. Yes, I've been in contact with Sangbote. Silin was originally just probing, but when Pianhua suddenly raised his head, he knew the information in one glance. So when Silin confirmed his guess, Pianhua also knew that he could not hide it anymore. You're really cunning. Pianhua sat next to the pile of rotten wood and flicked the cat on Hui Mao's ear with his finger. Hui Mao's flicking caused his finger to pop loudly. How did you come to be with Sangbote? Silin asked. I met him along the way, so I gave him a hand along the way. Also, Sangbo's popularity among the people is pretty high. Back when the prison was still around, I heard some people talk about him in prison. After I came out, I also learned some things, especially the people of Sector M. They all respect Sangbote a lot. I also received a mission to protect Sangbote until he is handed over to the people who will receive him. However, Sangbote has not contacted me of his own accord, and I cannot find his specific location for now. I didn't think that the person Sangbote was talking about was you. But if it is you, I can help persuade him. After all, Sangbo's safety can be somewhat guaranteed with you around. The pursuers will soon find Sangbote's location. They have a special tracker. Pianhua stood up and casually patted the dust on his pants. How is it? All right, I will wait at this location. If Sangbote is willing to accept my help, you can take him there. Silin gave the address of the newly built yard to Pianhua. I didn't expect you to have a place to live. I don't want anyone else to come to this yard. Silin looked at the yard. All right, I apologize for jumping in without permission. Remembering the address, Pianhua turned around, took a few steps and floated out. He looked very familiar with the process. I will go reinforce the surrounding protective wall system, Cheto said. Silin nodded and then looked at the Fuji tree that did not have many leaves and frowned. Hui Mao stretched his back and rubbed his claws out of habit. As a result, he scratched the already broken rotten wooden chair even more. What are you thinking about again, Silin? Hui Mao jumped onto Silin's shoulder and asked while secretly rubbing the rotten wood shavings on his claws on Silin's clothes. He also rubbed a small mushroom between his toes on Silin's collar. While the gray cat was grinning, Silin, who was staring at the Fuji tree leaves, raised a hand and pinched the hair at the back of the gray cat's neck. His other hand patted little mushroom on his shoulder and the back of his collar. I know you're up to no good the moment you hooked your tail. All right, I've modified the yard's protective system. There are too many loopholes, so it took a lot of time, Cheto said after walking out of the yard. If anyone else heard this, it would be strange if they didn't vomit blood in anger. It took less than 2 minutes, and you call it took a lot of time? If it were anyone else, it would probably take half a day. Looking at the almost bald and withered Fuji tree again, Silin grabbed Hui Mao, turned around and walked towards the door. Let's go over there. Silin waited in the new courtyard all the way until night time. Pianhua finally brought Sang Boat over quietly. There were also 5 people following Sang Boat over. They were Sang Boat's bodyguards. One of the bodyguards was heavily injured, and the other 2 were lightly injured. Those who weren't injured also looked tired, including Sambert. Only Pianhua looked very energetic. Silin, I know you. You saved me once, Sambot said to Silin. If he didn't know that the person who came was Silin, Sambot wouldn't have agreed so quickly. As for the reason he came at night, it was to avoid some eyes and ears. I am also very happy to see you again, Silin said. Chapter 397. I didn't expect you Linglong to find you. Sambot sighed. Silin smiled, but then Silin found that there was something wrong with Sambot's right hand hidden in his slender sleeve. Sensing Silin's gaze, Sambot raised his right arm and pulled up his sleeve, revealing his right arm that had been cut off. The wound had been treated, but it was only a rough treatment. It must have been quite painful. I was betrayed. They implanted a signal transmitter in my right hand. Sambot said. Sambot had been chased for some time. He also wondered why those people could always find him even though he was hiding so well. After checking several times, he didn't find anything special. Later, when he was in danger, he met Pianhua. Pianhua said the reason. Sambot's right hand was implanted with a special signal transmitter. Sambot liked the wristband communicator. Once, his wristband communicator broke, so he used a new one. He wore the communicator on his right hand, and since then he had never taken it off. After Pianhua said the reason, Sambot knew that his communicator had been tampered with. Knowing the reason, Sambot wanted to take off the communicator, but found that it was useless. The transmitter had already seeped into his right hand. Therefore, Sambot decisively cut off his right hand and destroyed the communicator. One of the reasons why he didn't take the initiative to contact Silin, and Silin couldn't contact Sambot was because the communicator was destroyed. However, Sambot didn't use the bodyguard's communicator. He had to be cautious now. Pianhua wasn't sure if there was only one signal transmitter. Maybe there were other more hidden signal transmitters to let the pursuers know Sambot's specific location. Therefore, they didn't dare to stay in a place that was easily exposed. When Pianhua was looking for a hiding place, he took a fancy to the courtyard in the wilderness. He also observed that there seemed to be no one living there, so he wanted to take the courtyard and use it as a temporary hiding place. After taking the courtyard, Pianhua could use the courtyard's protective network to set up some simple shielding facilities. However, he didn't expect to bump into Silin and the others as soon as he jumped in. Don't you need to treat your injury? Silin asked. No, let's stay like this for now. We'll talk about it when it's safe in the future. We might not even be able to return safely. Sambert waved his hand and was supported by the bodyguards into a room arranged by Silin for them to rest. They were really tired, but no matter how tired they were, the bodyguards had to take turns to guard them. For Sambert's hand injury, Silin didn't take out those medicines. Sambot was now very guarded against people. Perhaps he wasn't like this in the past, but after knowing that he was betrayed by someone he trusted, his guard became even stronger. If Sambert could be trusted a little more, the wound on his hand wouldn't have been treated so roughly. Silin didn't believe that Pixahuo hadn't taken out healing equipment, so it must have been Sambert who refused. They didn't even trust Pianhua who had saved them, so they definitely wouldn't trust Silin who was entrusted by Yu Linglong to protect Sangbai. Aren't you going to rest? Silin asked Pianhua, who was playing with Hui Mao with a piece of dried grass. I'm not tired yet. I'll rest later. Pianhua plucked the dried grass from Hui Mao's paws and swept Hui Mao's nose. He seemed to be in good spirits. All right. Silin, does the 11th squad accept outsiders? Pianhua turned to Silin. You want to join? I'm quite envious of you hunters. You can go on adventures everywhere. Pianhua looked at the short piece of dried grass in his hand that was bitten by the gray cat. He threw it away and sat upright. I'm serious. If you can accept outsiders, I want to join you as an outsider. Nope, the 11th squad doesn't accept outsiders. Wheeze interrupted Silin before he could answer. It was as if Wheeze was the decision-maker. Pianhua looked at Silin again and saw that he was thinking the same thing. After a moment of thought, he asked, what if I join the 11th squad? That way, he wouldn't be considered an outsider anymore. Silin fell silent. Pianhua was backed by one of the 3 great forces of Sector S, Fire Phoenix. If Pianhua joined the 11th squad, will your master agree? Silin didn't believe that Fire Phoenix would be so easy to talk to. Of course, my master has never objected to my decisions. Pianhua said confidently. Silin's curiosity was piqued. He had learned some information about Pianhua from Zijiu, and he knew that the current leader of Fire Phoenix valued Pianhua greatly. Pianhua's status in Fire Phoenix was very high, but the current Fire Phoenix didn't restrict him at all. When the prison was still around, Pianhua often visited the prison, and when the prison was no longer around, Pianhua left Sector to roam freely. Moreover, the current Fire Phoenix didn't even assign a bodyguard to Pianhua. It was a little illogical. Regardless of whether Sector S was a special place or not, the other 2 forces besides Fire Phoenix, Golden Beginnings and Genia protected Zhen Xingfu and the others very well, and Flying Snake's Zijiu also had a few protectors around him. It just so happened that Pianhua, whom the current Fire Phoenix valued quite a bit, was an exception. Zijiu was puzzled when he mentioned Pianhua. There was no doubt that Pianhua's status in Fire Phoenix was undeniable, but this person was just too weird. Could it be that Pianhua had disguised himself every time to avoid being recognized? If it was just a disguise, then the current Fire Phoenix shouldn't have allowed Pianhua to run around freely. Seeing that Silin didn't answer immediately, Pianhua turned around and looked at Hui Mao who was licking his paws. He said seriously, I can pay the admission fee. This amount. Pianhua said and gestured with his fingers. Hui Mao's eyes lit up in an instant, and he immediately looked at Silin. His meaning was for Silin to think about it carefully. Silin was speechless. Had this cat's weakness been exposed so quickly? All right, I'll give you time to think about it. I'm not in a hurry. You can give me an answer after this incident is over. Pianhua dusted his hands and stood up to stretch his arms. He didn't return to his room to rest, but instead sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and stared at the sky. This courtyard was already shielded from satellite surveillance, so even if there was an explosion in this courtyard, the sky wouldn't react. Hey, Silin, where has your 11th squad been? Recommend me some special places. If I can't join a hunter regiment, I want to go check them out myself, Pianhua said. Special places? Silin thinks for a moment, and then named a few places that hunters frequented, including their former hunting grounds. That's great, Pianhua said. Silin didn't know if Pianhua was referring to the hunter profession or those places. Hui Mao's ears twitched as he listened to the conversation lazily. Silin didn't need Hui Mao's reminder to notice that someone was coming his way. He had installed some sensors within 500 meters of the courtyard, and someone had triggered them. The sensors didn't detect people, but metals. This way, the chances of being discovered would be reduced. The people in this area wouldn't carry precious metals with them. Weapons made from such metals were extremely expensive, and the people of the civilian district couldn't afford them at all. Moreover, the fact that someone was able to move so quickly while carrying such metals meant that they were no ordinary person. Cheto immediately notified Sambot while he was next door. As expected, the signal transmitter wasn't the only thing they relied on to track someone. A moth-like insect flew into the courtyard, and Sillin stared at it for a moment. It looked very similar to a normal moth at first glance, but a closer look would reveal that there was a huge difference between the two. This wasn't a moth. There weren't many moths in this area, and they were considered a rare species. The most common species in this area were flies. The smell of blood on Sambot's injured right hand, and Sambot's own scent. These people were using these special moths to sense smell to track Sambot. They had made a few preparations. At first, they must have relied on the signal transmitter to track Sambot, but they also considered the possibility that the transmitter might be discovered and destroyed. Therefore, they used this kind of moth. Hui Mao jumped up and swallowed the moth that flew into the courtyard. He opened his mouth and swallowed it. Disgusting, Hui Mao commented. Why are you eating it even though it's disgusting? Pianhua curled his lips at the side. Pianhua and Sillin retreated to the small building. Cheto and Sambot's two bodyguards stood guard on the other side of the building. Almost silent bullets shot towards Sillin and Pianhua, but they were all blocked by a transparent shield in front of them. This was Pianhua's setup. Pucci, an arrow of blood sprayed into the air from outside the wall. Then, there was the sound of a human body falling to the ground. This was Hui Mao's handiwork. Squatting next to the stone bench and being ignored, Hui Mao took advantage of the moment when the people were shooting at Sillin and Pianhua. His claw almost broke the person's neck, and this was the result of Hui Mao holding back. It had been holding back for a long time, and it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After discovering that their companions had been hit for some reason, the people immediately became vigilant of their surroundings. But in the next moment, 3 of them were shot in the head almost at the same time. Who fired the shot? This was the question on the remaining people's minds. The only person who pulled out a gun at the small building was Sillin, but they clearly saw that Sillin's gun wasn't pointed in their direction. Why were they shot? And 3 people were shot at the same time. This was just the beginning. 5 more people were shot in succession. They were still wondering before they died. They clearly avoided the muzzle, and they clearly weren't in the direction the muzzle was pointing at, so why were they shot? After finishing off these people, Sillin turned around and Pianhua also finished off 2 people. There was a hidden weapon on her arm. Normally, it looked like a normal arm guard, but it was a killing weapon right now. The hidden weapon shot out was very fast, and it had a certain degree of tracking function. After the hidden weapon hit the person, it exploded inside the person's body. Although it was a small explosion, the critical point was that the internal organs exploded and killed them very quickly. A product of Fire Phoenix's technology? Sillin was puzzled. I remember you have a whip, Sillin said. Pianhua didn't answer. She hadn't recovered from her nervous state just now. She looked around vigilantly. There are 13 people here, but there are only 11 corpses. She suspected that there were 2 more people hiding around. There's no need to look, they're all dead. The moment Sillin finished speaking, the gray cat jumped over from the other side of the courtyard wall and curled its lips. It complained as it walked over, disgusting. Pianhua. On the other side of the building, Cheto had finished off 7 people, and the remaining 2 were taken care of by Sambot's subordinates. When Sillin entered the house, Sambot and his subordinates looked at Sillin and Cheto strangely. They didn't see Sillin's performance, but 2 subordinates who were responsible for observing Sillin's side did. Just a moment ago, they were still doubting Cheto and Cheto's capabilities, but before they could react, they saw Cheto pull out a gun and shoot at them. Not only that, he was also shooting at them at an extremely fast speed. His speed was so fast that they only realized how many people Cheto had killed when he dragged the dead pursuers inside. Sambot had witnessed the 11 squad's combat power back at Sector M, and he was shocked once more today. From the moment they discovered the pursuers, to the moment they attacked, to the moment they finished off the entire wave of pursuers, it didn't take more than 3 minutes. Strictly speaking, the time it took to finish off the pursuers was less than a minute, excluding the time they spent waiting vigilantly. When Sambot's bodyguards thought back to every time they ran into a wave of pursuers, they fell silent. "Is everyone in Vanguard the same as you?" Sambot asked. "Nope." Sillin knew what Sambot meant, but if even a fifth, a 10th, or even a 100th of Vanguard's members had Cheto's combat power, the Big Four would have ceased to exist a long time ago. The only one left behind would be Vanguard, the absolute ruler of the high ground. "I think so too." Sambot smiled himself. It was obvious that he had thought of the same logic. The pursuers this time were only the first wave. They were the vanguard sent by Yu Linglong's second cousin brother, Yu Xing. There would definitely be more coming after them, but no one knew when they would arrive. However, I advise you to treat the wound on your hand first and conceal your aura. Sillin took out a small spray bottle. Everyone in the 11th squad was very familiar with this kind of spray bottle because they used it often. Sillin told Sambot about the moth from before and took out a moth. There were 2 tracking moths, and Hui Mao had eaten one of them. The other one was kept as evidence. Sambot didn't refuse this time, and Pianhua took out his medical equipment of his own accord for Sambot to use. However, Sambot's bodyguard didn't know how to use it, so Pianhua guided him from the side. No, you need to apply the medicine evenly. It can't be too thick. You need to apply another medicine later. Don't apply it too far away from the wound. Pianhua kept instructing the bodyguard on the correct application of the medicine. However, the bodyguard's hands weren't very dexterous, and he wasn't very proficient in this. In the past, when they were injured, they just had to do some simple treatment. After enduring it, they would go to the healing pod and lie down. The medical machinery would help them, so there was no need to do such complicated things. Although the treatment would definitely be much better, the process of applying medicine was really troublesome, and there were many details that needed to be paid attention to. The bodyguard who was more familiar with medicine was injured, so his movements wouldn't be very dexterous. He could only let this person who wasn't familiar with medicine help Sambot. After applying the first medicine, the bodyguard was already sweating profusely. He felt that this was much more difficult than dealing with the pursuers. Seeing this, Sambot waved his hand and looked at Pianhua. "I'll have to trouble you to help. They're too clumsy." "Okay, it'll be quick. I'm familiar with this, and now that it's done, it'll be much easier for you to go back and do the differentiation treatment." Pianhua picked up the second medicine and began to apply it skillfully. The bodyguard used 5 minutes to apply the first medicine, while Pianhua only used half a minute to apply the second medicine, and then continued with the other treatments. Judging from Pianhua's proficiency, it wasn't hard to imagine that this person had suffered many injuries before. Most of the time, it was these primitive medicines that saved people without any auxiliary machinery. Even the most advanced medical equipment couldn't replace these medicines, and this was something that hunters felt the most deeply. 5 minutes later, Sambot's hand looked much better than before after being treated anew. Sambot and his subordinates had also used the scent concealment spray Sillin had given them before, so they should be able to avoid the tracking moths. It was just that they didn't know what other methods the pursuers might use to track them down. "This time I have to thank you brats," Sambert said. "Brats?" Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at Pianhua. It was obvious that this person was a woman at first glance. This old man's eyesight was really bad. It wasn't that Sambot's eyesight was bad, but Pianhua's disguise was too good. After all, Sambot and his men weren't Hui Mao and Cheto. Sambot moved his newly treated arm and looked at Pianhua again. "I suddenly feel that you look a little like an old friend of mine." Just now, Sillin noticed that Sambot's gaze towards Pianhua was a little strange. So this was the reason. However, Sambot's friend, Pianhua, who was tidying up the medicine bottles, paused for a moment when he heard Sambot's words. Then, he continued to tidy up and asked in a casual tone, "Your friend?" Who is it? Si Fong. Silin's eyelids twitched. See? Very quickly, Silin's attention moved from this surname to this name. He had seen this name before when he went to Sector S with Lung in some of the information Lung had given him. This person wasn't mentioned in the military information the League of Stars government had made public. And the reason why Celine was able to pay special attention to this person was mainly because he was Grandfather Mo's son. Because before Grandfather Mo's son Mo Qing, the person who sat in his position was Si Fong. After Si Fong, Mo Qing then took over Si Fong's position. Si Fong was a famous general of the empire back then. She was also the only woman among the most influential generals. Later on, due to certain matters, Si Fong was sent to Sector S's highest prison, and there was no news of her after that. At the time, Silin didn't pay attention to the information of a lot of military higher-ups who were sent to the highest prison. But now, looking at Pianhua who was playing with a medicine bottle with her head lowered, Silin felt a little suspicious. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.